Okay, welcome to the, July 27th, it's hard to believe, board meeting of the Reston Association. Thank you guys for being here in person. It's always fun to see people in the audience. Thank you to all the board members and staff who I know are here floating around. I've seen them. And of course, legal counsel. Don't want to leave out that. So I want to call the meeting to order. Want to share a couple opening remarks, which is my personal favorite time of the meeting. We have David on the phone. We have David on the phone. Mike joined us. For those of you that forgot, Mike Sanyo is on the board of directors.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here. Thank you, Sherry.
He's on travel to Reston this week.
That's right. That's right.
Sherry will be here all night.
So we're going to get this show started so we can turn on your mic, Mike. So first of all, I want to thank all those folks that have put in applications to serve on various committees. It was great to actually have to hold a separate meeting because there were so many applicants. That's a great position to be in. So I want to thank all of you for being interested, and we're still doing some interviewing before we make any final decisions on that and bring that back to the full board. We do have one on the consent calendar tonight, but the physical committee, we're pausing, and we're going to finish that up in September. So I want to just thank all those folks for put their name in the hat, and obviously those who are already serving in a volunteer status. We could not do what we do without the volunteers that come out for Reston Association. The second thing I want to say is I want to recognize Reclaim Reston for all of the work they have done on the awareness around the increase to the PRC zoning. I just want everybody to know that David, although he's in Tahoe right now, and Kate and I continually meet with Supervisor Hudgens on a regular basis to talk about that issue as well as others. There's a lot of community groups meeting to put together some information to go back to the county with. You know, John McBride is working on things all the time, and Larry and folks on the land use staff, and some of our volunteer groups like the, John, what is that, the
multimodal.
The multimodal, and I know Dick Rogers has been working with staff, and you have too, John, as well, just to continually gather information from any source we can possibly get it from, so we can go back. As you guys probably know, the supervisor has scheduled a follow-on meeting to talk about that density proposal in end of September. So we are just continually trying to gather some information so we can better prepare ourselves and actually her so that they're prepared for that meeting to make it as productive as possible. So I also want to remind everybody that on the 7th of August is another budget session. We'll be talking about capital budget on the 7th. And then again on the 14th, we'll be talking about the operations budget. So it's open to the public. Come and listen to the discussions and give us feedback and comment. This is all of our budgets. So the more input we can get, the better. We have a new treasurer, so I'm excited to see what kind of craziness we see in our budget. I know he's been working really hard with Kate and the fiscal committee on that too. So
And Robert.
And Robert. Don't want to forget Robert, wherever he may be. So with that, I would like to close the opening comments and move on to the approval of our agenda tonight. If there's
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. Ray, did you vote on that? Are we unanimous on that?
I'm sorry?
Are we unanimous on that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're unanimous on that. First decision of the night. How about
Rolling.
that? All right.
Rolling.
So moving on to the consent calendar, which is the approval of our minutes from our June 22nd meeting, along with the committee volunteer appointments.
I move to adopt.
Okay.
Second.
Any, all in favor?
Aye.
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 David?
Any opposed?
Aye.
David's just taking a drink, so we got to give him that. He's on vacation.
This is one of those delayed broadcasts.
It is. We're on a 7-second.
Okay, something we haven't had in a while is a treasurer's report. So, Mr. Treasurer.
Sure. How are we going to do it? Should I go up there, sit here?
You have 15 minutes and
No,
no
I know,
more.
but where should I?
You can do it from wherever you're comfortable. You can,
Yeah.
you might want to, if you're going to stay, you could spin and, or you can go to the podium, or you can go up there.
I'll actually go there.
I don't know.
I don't think so, then I'll sit here.
She said it is on that.
Oh, it is on that? Okay, all right. Hi, good evening. This is something that I've heard has not happened in the past, so this is the first time we're going to do this, and thank you. So a lot of this has been done just in the last few days after the fiscal committee meeting. It is based upon, the books, the numbers that I received from Robert Wood, Kate, and the staff basically, but a lot of this is really the way I have extracted and presented, so this is a work in process. This is the first time. Going forward, I'm really hoping to refine this, make it even more of an operational report as opposed to just financial results report, so that you get, actual sales numbers, some context, some color on the operations, those kinds of things. But this is a start. This is something that was put together in a rush. Like I said, the numbers are from the RA staff, but the analysis is mine, the presentation is mine, so all the errors are mine that you see on this. So the way this is structured, you're going to see series of slides talking about year-to-date revenues, year-to-date expenses. That is up to end of June. You will also be seeing budget to actuals year-to-date, right? What was projected at the beginning of the year for 2017 and where we are today. Look at the variances. And then you'll see 2017 versus 2016 year-to-date. I also have a slide that would address the reforecast of the budget, because we are at the halfway point for this year. So the budgets have been reforecast, and you'll see a table with some minimal comments around what that really implies, what kinds of changes you're going to see, and then I just have some general comments that I'll go through. So this first slide is really the year-to-date revenues. As you can see, we are at about 16.7 million year-to-date in terms of revenues. As many of you know, most of the revenues really come from assessments. It's about 86%. And all of them are pretty much collected at the beginning of the year. There's always some laggards, there's always collections issues, but because of that, our revenues are almost always front-loaded. And by the middle of the year, we also have the summer season related revenues picking up, which is why you will see that as we go towards the end of the year, you will see the revenues actually not really going up. We would hit, close to where we want to be. So going by that, it is about 16.7 million year to date, for the 6 months. Revenues for pools, from pools. When I say pools, it's all of aquatics, programs, swim and tennis passes, all of those things put together was about 562,000. We'll look at comparisons in the following slides. Tennis, a variety of other items go into the all other category, and that was about 575,000. I know one item that people might be interested in is the lake house. Lake house revenues came in at about 80,000 for the year as of June 30th. So this next slide is really addressing the cost side. So year to date, our expenses have been about 7.25 million. Open space, obviously trails, central services facility, the fields, all of those kinds of items really get picked up under this bucket, and that's the largest one with 2 million. You had management services coming in at about 1.3 million, corporate board about 191,000. As you can see, pool expenses were higher at 640,000 as opposed to the revenues of 562,000, which is normal because there's a baseline operating expense related to operating the pools. And then the lake house cost, the cost of operating the lake house was about 126,000 for the first 6 months of the year, as against 80,000 in terms of revenues. But overall, it's about 7.25 million. This one compares the budgets versus actuals, this slide. So the green line that you see is really a it shows the percentage variance between what was projected, budgeted for the beginning of the year, for the whole year, and what you see in terms of results. Those numbers are actually on the left side in terms of dollars, right? So as you can see from an assessment perspective, we projected about 14.3, we have about 14.4 million that we picked up, but this doesn't as yet reflect some of the refunds that we will be making based upon tax refunds. Based upon tax analysis, we refund based upon affordability some of the assessments to people, and those refunds have not yet gone out. So, but we are pretty much where we projected we would be. Overall expense-wise, again, 16.7 revenues-wise, 16.7 million is what we projected. 16.6 million we projected. We are at 16.7. The big item, of course, is Lake House revenues. As you can see, we are down by about 46%. We projected about 150,000 at the beginning of the year. We are at 80,000. And as I understand, it's really because of scheduling conflicts in terms of program versus corporate and other rentals. So they're still working through the scheduling issues, but you are going to see this difference flowing throughout the year. So those are the big ticket items. Pool revenues I already talked about. That is, it's going to be lower than we projected. Expenses, we are at 7.3 million versus 7.25. 7.25 is the actual expense versus 7.5 that we projected at the beginning of the year. Rest of the items are pretty much tracking to where they ought to be, whether it is central services facilities or management and management services, corporate. There are, you'll see some variances up and down. But again, Lake House, as you saw, that 46% was the the revenue shortfall. The expense shortfall is going to be about 28%. Part of the reason is going to be that a lot of those costs are already fixed on a fixed basis, so you really can't pull them back, even if you're having some revenue challenges. So, and that's what is contributing to the difference there. This next slide is 2017 revenue actuals versus 2016. So how did we do this year versus what we did last year? So last year 13.7 was the assessment revenue was 13.7, and we are at 14.4. This year, obviously, the assessments have gone up. What we charge this year, that's a big reason why you see that difference. Likewise, on the total revenue side, that's what is really reflected. Last year, if you see the community pools, that is basically aquatics, we had 603,000 in revenues. This year, we are at 562. And that's really reflective of the fact that this year the swim and tennis passes were lower in number compared with last year, at least up to June 30th. I haven't got the updated numbers as yet, but once we get that, we probably will catch up some of those things, though I believe tennis is probably forecast to be lower. I don't yet know where swimming will actually end up, but we'll have to see. But that's what it really reflects, swim and tennis passes. So expenses, 7.25, we already talked about that, but 6.9 was really the total expenses, actual expenses last year. So we are higher than where we were, but some of our programmatic costs, especially Lake House, if you look at it, it's actually higher. It's something that's higher than last year. So that's reflective of that. Community pools, again, 751,000 last year versus 640. It has come down lower, and that really reflects the fact that we opened the pools late this year relative to last year. So this next slide is where I have a table that presents the budget that we had initially versus what we are reforecasting. Very minimal variances. Lake House, I already talked about that, but if you look at it, the main item is going to be revenues are going to be slightly lower than we projected. Again, substantially coming from, essentially coming from the pools as well as the Lake House. From an expense perspective, we are slightly over in certain categories, but generally we're not doing too bad. So we're going to track actually lower than where we were, approximately 400,000, where we were projecting at the beginning of the year. As far as capital projects are concerned, we are tracking to what we had projected. I believe overall, taking into account carry forwards as well as deferred projects, as well as the ones that were approved at the beginning of the year as part of the capital budget, the total was about 4.5 million. About 2.5 million worth of projects were supposed to be completed by the end of the year, and we are on track from an implementation perspective, and so the carry forward will be 1.9 million. I understand that this year we're doing better than we used to because we actually have somebody managing the capital project. So you're going to see the going forward. Maybe at the next meeting I will be presenting the carry forwards as a percentage what it was 3 years back, 2 years back, 4 years back, and what it is now, and you will see that shrinking based upon how things are being implemented. The second item that I intend to focus on is also when the board approves a project, that money is encumbered out of the funds, out of the reserve funds. Unless the project is started, right, you really don't need to encumber them. So I'll probably be presenting such data going forward to see what the carry forwards are, what the unencumbered amounts are. And the reason for the unencumbered amounts is that you can use that to reduce the assessments, basically, from a capital perspective. So the next one, I just want to close out with some general comments. So I've been doing this for a little over a month. I've been working closely with Robert Wood, Kate, and many of the staff members. I've had tons of meetings. I have lots of spreadsheets. Takes a lot of time to wade through all of them, but I'm plodding through all that, and hopefully we'll have more and more analysis that I can present even in one-off meetings as well as part of the Treasurer's report. The budget process is well underway. Robert and Kate have been receiving the budgets from various departments. I've looked at some of those, first passes already, and so I'll continue to work with them, and we are going to have board work sessions as well in August, as well as in September, to refine that and get into more and more detailed capital as well as from an operational perspective. So you'll see that. I know one of the issues that's top on a lot of people's minds is really internal controls, post Lake House and Tetra, acquisition. One of the cycles is already done, a critical purchasing contracting cycle. The package is done. So typically you do that in multiple packages, and you thread them together to make sure that they're all synced together. So the first one is done. The second one is almost done. So I'm hoping at least that internally we'll be pretty comfortable with it by September, at least between Robert, Kate, and some of the senior staff and I, and then should be done before the year end. I think that was the goal, and hopefully we'll get there. So that's what I have this time. Thank you. Yes, question.
One
Yeah.
question, and I don't know if this is to you or to Kate, but you spoke of the Lake House revenue projections being off. Were they based off of still where we were thinking rental income, or is it our new projections of the new programming? You know what I'm asking? We had some numbers that we had projected early on based on rent back, but we're past that original period, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
So
that's-
any of these numbers
that ended last year.
reflect
Yeah.
our current programming.
So the current programming hasn't changed yet. We are reflecting some different programming as we go into 2018, so there'll be some decision points for the board there. But we've adjusted based on our experience in the first 6 months.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Nicely done for first month out.
Thank you.
Expect a trajectory to be.
Yes, exactly.
You set a bar standard here. Okay, so Kate, we're going to ask you to give us some of the highlights of your goals and where we are mid-year, second quarter, done. So I know they're in your packet, but I just asked her to cover a couple that she thought were the most important. So it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. So out of the 12 goals that were given to me last month that the board approved, I wanted to report out on 4 in particular that were in your packet that have been completed so far. The first one is under the area of optimizing member experiences related to the strategic plan, and that goal for that particular focus area is to optimize the services, programming, and facilities offered to the association's members. The very first goal there was to inventory and evaluate all RA fixed assets currently identified in the proposed 2018 and 19 capital budget and compared to the reserve study and funding in the Reserve Repair and Replacement Fund. And I was to report the findings to the Fiscal Committee no later than July 2017, so adjustments can be made during the 2018-2019 budget cycle. So our Director of Capital Projects, Garrett Skinner, did produce that report this Monday on July the 24th of the first draft of the 2018-2019 capital budgets. And even today, we're going to be making some slight adjustments before they're presented for the board's consideration on August the 7th. That is the first board budget work session that we've got on the 2018-19, totally focused on capital, which is new. It's not something that we've ever done in the past, but it is certainly important for the board. So that we've got that complete, ready to go, and look forward to having an in-depth conversation on the 7th of August there. The second goal that I wanted to report out on is under leading sustainable change, and that is to enhance and protect Reston's built and natural environments to ensure development and redevelopment is consistent with the essential elements of Reston. The goal that was given to me was for the board's consideration again this month to develop a plan for RA to play a more active role in engaging and communicating with the public, county, and other stakeholders on development and redevelopment with a view to launching those activities as soon as possible. And as Sherry indicated, lots going on with the county in conversations and meetings with the supervisor's office in particular, as well as our Senior Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Resources, Larry Butler, and his land use planner are in conversations with county staff and talking about a variety of different things. Separate and apart from that, what I felt would support this goal was to develop a set of land use goals for the next 12 to 36 months. So we did attach that to this information. It's something that Larry, our land use council, and I worked on together, but they cover the areas of the different topics, and again, they are attached to this report, but it's to inform members of land use and transportation projects, and there are a laundry list of activities underneath that. The development of guidelines for development and redevelopment projects we felt was important. We have some activities for that. RA open space and recreation proffers with new development, key focus on that, making sure that we maintain our infrastructure and the facilities that we have. The Reston Master Plan and Comprehensive Plan monitoring and input, it's very important. We've already seen with some of the projects over the past 6 months the importance of looking at that master plan and making sure that any new projects coming before us are following that master plan that was put together by the community over a 5-year period. Also, multimodal transportation monitoring and advocacy, working closely with our multimodal advisory committee on that and making sure projects are getting in place. And last but not least, more of an internal focus, looking at plats, easements, records, and maps, making sure we have everything in one place, easily accessible, and that we're using those as important reference materials. So there's a land use goals there. So that's completed for your review. The next two have to fall under Focus Area 5, managing competing resources, and the goal there is to manage our resources to best serve RA and our members. So the first one there is by Q4, decrease the 2017 operating expenses in real costs by at least 2% without impacting member-facing programs and services. Because we were able to get through the first 6 months and we had real data to work with and we could start doing some forecasting as just reported out by Sridhar, we were able to identify expense savings of approximately $379,000, that it's a permanent variance for operating expenses that didn't touch member-facing experiences. So we've met that request or that goal by about 2.5%. So we plan on keeping that. We might have more to report before the end of the year, but we wanted to stay on track there. And the last was to, as part of the 2018-19 budget development process for the board's consideration in August, identify opportunities to increase non-assessment revenue by 10% in 2018 and decrease operating expenses and real costs by at least 3% in 2018, but not, again, looking to cut member-facing experiences, instead focusing in on options to modify the staff compensation and benefits program, as well as management of legal services. Although presented to the fiscal committee on Monday, we were able to meet that goal, and we look forward to talking more about what the 2018 operating budget looks like with revenues and expenses on August the 14th. So we were able to meet those, and again, look forward to a conversation. So that's a high-level overview on the goals that were provided to me last month. So we wanted to get cracking right away because we had some deadlines we had to meet.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Any comments or?
I have one question, Kate. On item D3 in land use goals, you speak of a Reston Land Use College for Reston members. I would find that, I would believe that would be very useful. I would imagine that's taught, by whom would that be taught? County staff, our own land use attorney, or what?
Well, we hope to do that as a joint effort with Reston Association and county zoning staff and the supervisor's office if we can. Again, these are 12 to 36 month goals, so hopefully Sherry and I with David will be able to have that conversation and reinstate that and work to hold that to keep members informed.
Good question. Any others? Thanks, Kate. So we're going to move into member comments. We did this at an earlier meeting where we would hold some comments to when it was closer to the topic itself. So if you have a comment that's related to one of these topics, I'd like to go back to that only because these topics are so diverse. I don't want to lose the comment by the time we get to the topic, which could be 2 hours from now. Let's hope not, but you never know. So if you have general comments, I do have a list. So we can go down this. If you want to just pause and say you're going to talk during a specific topic, just let me know. Suzanne?
I'm going to talk about a specific agenda item later on.
Okay.
So I don't have the whole.
Okay. Adrian?
Specific item as well.
Okay. Then? Okay. As a reminder, you have 3 minutes. If you could just give us your name and your address.
Good evening. Vin Nair, Reston, Inlet Code 1531. I went it backwards this way. I would like to speak about the need for a technology review advisory committee at RA that will be a qualified, trusted partner for the board of directors and staff in making cost-effective, strategic, and intelligent decisions regarding its technology initiatives. Using the assistance of a technology review advisory committee, RA will benefit from lower procurement and operational costs, as well as superior technological choices from well-informed decisions. Comprised of technology professionals from across RA members, the founding of a technology review advisory committee that will meet regularly will benefit RA from providing technical solutions for common business problems at RA. Its objectives will be to conduct discovery efforts to understand RA's technology landscape. I'm not sure if it is very clearly documented and laid out for us to look at it readily and analyze and come up with solutions. Advise on long-term and short-term cost-cutting initiatives, assist RA in technology procurement activities, provide for appropriate data security and data privacy, recommend solution alternatives, its pros and cons, and the best value choice, and in certain cases provide hands-on implementations to solutions on a volunteer basis. This will benefit RA by providing a qualified, trusted partner to help with its decisions and technology initiatives, and based on past lessons learned, avoid repeated pitfalls due to the absence of such an entity. For example, the Reston.org website was overpriced at a $100,000 price tag for what has been repeatedly reviewed as a product of bad quality and user experience by RA members. Another example is the WebTrack rollout. We all agree that that did not go out very smoothly because of gathering PII for picture IDs in the absence of knowledge of what sort of information security the tool provides. At an age of cloud computing, storage, and in some cases serverless computing, the cost of hosting, operations, and maintenance can be brought down to a fraction of the traditional data center models. Similarly, using open source solutions and microservices, there are far superior coding solutions that can prove to be more maintainable and less expensive. Now, these are just some of the examples of benefits such a committee can provide in the area of IT, but generally in technology as well, are able to benefit from such a body. So I hope to draft a committee charter that will describe its objectives, organization, and responsibilities, and send it to the board in time for the August Board Operations Committee meeting. I'd request that you review the draft charter and facilitate next steps towards the founding of such a technology review advisory committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. We look forward to seeing that. Just FYI, you have a little extra time because I don't believe we meet in August. So you have till September's BOC meeting. So yay, you get an extra 30 days. Okay. Alan?
My name is Alan Zora. I've lived in Reston for 45 years. I live currently at 2310 Millennium Lane. In those 45 years, at the beginning of those 45 years, I spent a lot of time with Bob Simon talking about what he thought his vision for Reston was and how, near the end, he was very fearful that developmental interests, economic interests would completely overwhelm the original concept of Reston. And I'm afraid, I believe, he was correct. For 45 years, I've been a federal bureaucrat. I've helped set up military bureaucracies where, per dollar spent, we've killed more people than any other country on earth. I've helped set up bureaucracies at NIH where, per dollar spent, we've created great research results and saved many, many lives. Both were very effective. I would argue that one benefited society far more. I also set up about 15 safety organizations for the federal government, Occupational Safety and Health, FAA, a whole bunch of other ones, where Congress gave us a one-paragraph authority, and we, through our bureaucratic expertise, expanded our authorities to cover multiple areas and hiring hundreds of people and generating many millions of dollars of income, serving no one but ourselves and certainly not the American public. More miners die now than used to, yet we spend a lot of money on mine safety. I've lived in Reston 45 years. As I think all of you know, Fairfax County provides all the essential services to the geographic area of Reston, whether it's police, fire, education, environmental services, roads, you name it. So there is nothing essential that Reston Association does. If we were a town, we would have to do those things like Herndon does. And we spend as much money as towns do, yet we get very little for our money. Most federal bureaucracies I work for do insignificant things for all the wrong reasons and cost a lot of money and have no benefit to the communities that they supposedly serve. I worked for a lot of them. I helped set them up. I helped destroy them. Reston Association, in my mind, falls into the category of the insignificant but not particularly helpful bureaucracy. It's created a lot of things that it was never intended to do. When I first got here, Reston took care of the woods, the pools. People who did those things actually knew their business. They could tell a hop hornbeam from a hawthorn from a hickory, and they knew how to maintain those trees and the forests. The people working on on the roadways knew what they were doing. There was no big office staff. There was somebody coordinating a small team of people, and everything necessary got done. Most of the people I've talked to, who supposedly are performing essential services for Reston Association, have no idea of what they're doing or why. They've never done anything real in their lives. They can't make anything. They can't grow anything. They can't build anything, and yet they're telling other people what to do. Absolute inanity. So I actually would propose an alternate to Reston Association. A lower cost, fewer staff, community valued activities only, not developer dominated, not income maximizing, not ridiculously bloated, self-serving bureaucracy. And those are my kind observations about Reston Association. Thank you.
Patty?
I'm speaking to you as a 25-year Reston resident. To the Reston Association Board of Directors, a prepared statement. The Property Owners Association Act, outlining Virginia statute, states the following in relation to distribution of information. The Board of Directors shall establish a reasonable, effective, and free method appropriate to the size and nature of the association for lot owners to communicate among themselves and the Board of Directors regarding any matter concerning the association. The Reston Association governing documents under Article 3, Reston Association member rights states the following. The Board of Directors shall establish a reasonable, effective, and free method for members to communicate amongst themselves and the Board of Directors regarding any matter concerning the association according to the procedures set forth in the Property Owners Association Act. A couple of months ago, a family came before this board asking for assistance in relation to an incident with their daughter. Their communication with the county and police was unproductive. Their plea was basically asking the Reston Association to get involved. This board honored their request. I propose this is directly related now to my request. I would like the association to get involved and support the statute for communication as I have previously stated. I considered your involvement related to what I have just mentioned as establishing precedent. I am asking enforcement of statute guidelines that already exist. I submit this is a compliance issue for clusters, and non-compliance may be considered subject to RA sanctions. Our clusters need to be made aware that they have a responsibility within their community. I consider the Reston Association as having an obligation to recognize and express their concerns when such responsibility is not established. I further request that the Reston Association needs to acknowledge a responsibility to Reston residents to work toward a procedure creating a means of communication from Reston members to this board and members among themselves as stated in the RA governing documents. I have ideas that I will bring forward to the Community Engagement Advisory Committee members regarding this request. You ask Reston residents to get involved. Now I am asking you. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Thanks, Patty.
Thanks, Patty. I think at another, not tonight, but I need a little bit more background on what we're trying to solve. So maybe we can get together at some point and talk about it. Okay. Thank you for your statement. Moira.
I am speaking about something that's coming later, but I have light in the morning.
Okay,
I was waiting for some food, so I would like to ask.
That's
you
fine.
to
It's okay.
Speak. Could I ask you to pass those out? I also prepared something for you, and you can hold on to it for. I don't know if I have enough, but you can use it later in your meeting to refer to what I said.
This is a lot thicker than Patty's was.
It's not. It's small. It's
gonna
only
speak
6
faster.
pages, I swear, with a cover sheet.
This is just a summary.
You all set? Oh, I had enough. Awesome. All right, I'm here to address Board Packet Item M, which is regarding a letter to the Park Authority to encourage funding for a countywide dog park study. As many of you are new board members, you may not be aware that the dog park in Barron Cameron Park is extremely noisy and has serious negative impacts upon those living closest, including me. It's a fallacy that dog barking is masked by cars on Wheelie Avenue. I can hear dog barking from my bed. Yesterday morning, my 9-year-old told me that he was awakened by dog barking. Yesterday, my neighbor, who is recovering from a very serious surgery, was also awakened, and she endured hours of barking because she's homebound at this point in time. If you turn to page 1 with the big yellow 1 on it, that is just a chart that I made. In addition to the daily barking that can sometimes go on for hours, over the past 2 months, I have reported trespassing in the park 8 times. I have been awakened from my sleep as early as 6:17 and 6:34 a.m. on weekend mornings, where I get dressed, I go outside, I go over there and I take a photo and send it to the county. I have been gone for 2 of those weeks, so that kind of gives you an idea as to how often this is occurring, and it's not the same person every time. The dog park opens at 8 on weekends, so you can imagine being awakened by dogs at 6:17 is not very pleasant. Page number 2. When dog parks were established, and there's a huge history there, residents were promised the county would get it right. I would like the RA board to hold the county accountable to this. I don't think it's right to exempt dog barking, which the county recently did, removing 50 years of protection for those living near its park in its noise ordinance. I also don't think it's right to keep a dog park in place when it's clearly a nuisance. You can turn to page 3. It is my understanding that a homeowners association's role is to protect the property values and sanctity of the homes in which its residents live in this famed planned community. Therefore, I think it would be most helpful if this board would do the following in addition to writing that letter. Number 1, which is on page 4, it is to encourage the Park Authority to relocate this dog park to Lake Fairfax Park. Lake Fairfax is going to be master planned in September is when they're starting, and it is already a dog park on the plan. Neighbors and dog park users support this idea, and I would like for your help with that. Number 2, suggestion 2 is on page 5. Encourage the county to move off-leash dog parks to a higher priority in its county zoning ordinance work program. It's currently listed as a priority 2 item. One would think in a planned community that the installment requirements would be in place before development occurs, and as you know, there's going to be dog parks coming into Reston as the TSA is being developed. I highly encourage installation requirements. I was the one to make that suggestion to the county. I think they should include setback guidelines. I think they should have special exception use, which should be considered for any dog park installation, just as the county requires it for kennels. I believe these 2 things would be most helpful for me and my neighbors and the Reston community as a whole, especially considering that dog parks are going to be coming in the TSA area and elsewhere in Reston. My neighbors and I have endured this for a very long time. I have carried this torch for 4 years now, and it is not fun to go home from all these meetings and all these emails that I send, and every day it's the same thing. It is horrible. We would really appreciate your help on this matter, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Maura. Have a safe flight.
Thanks.
Tammy. Okay. Paul. Okay. Okay. Anybody else want to has a general comment? All right. Then we will move on. So Sabrina, if you'll remind me that we're going to do comments during each of these so I don't just blow through them. Okay, so we're going to hear a Covenants Committee appeal. Nikki is going to give us, why don't Nikki give us some background?
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Veleza with Reston Association. I'm the watershed manager, so I'm in charge of the lakes and streams here. Just wanted to give you the facts. So the Reston Association deed says, except for emergencies or association authorized maintenance, no boats greater than 18 feet in overall length and 10 feet in overall width, and no boats powered by or equipped with internal combustion engines shall be allowed on the lake. So that was in the original deed when our forefathers created Reston. In 2008, there were 9 boats that were issued exemptions to this. So there were some boats that were 20 feet long. That exemption clearly stated that the waiver was only granted to the original owner of the boat and did not transfer to any other owner of the boat, and it did not convey with the sale of the property. Specifically, the boat that we're talking about today, the Black Orca, was owned by Wally Archaean at 11101 Lake Chapel Lane. His waiver specifically said to keep your boat on the lake that it's currently moored on. If the owners of the properties identified no longer occupy or sell their respective properties or boats, the limited exemption allowing them to keep their current boats on the lake on which their boats are currently moored shall automatically expire. And it shall be incumbent upon those owners to either remove their boat from the lake or have their boat altered to meet the covenant. It cannot convey to any other person or property with any property transaction. The limited exemption granted herein is specifically applicable to the parties identified and may not be transferred to any other person or property. In August of 2016, Wally Archaean sold his property. The boat did not convey with his property. He sold the boat to his neighbor, Mr. Hollins. Mr. Hollins took the boat off the lake to get an estimate for shortening it. Mr. Hollins bought the boat knowing that the boat did not comply, was in violation, and needed to be shortened in order to comply. However, he brought the boat back on the lake without being shortened. We cited him as being in violation, went through the process, took him to Covenants Committee. Covenants Committee upheld the decision that the waiver did not transfer and that the boat needs to be shortened or removed from the lake. Mr. Hollins appealed that. You guys decided to hear the appeal, and we're here today.
Thank you.
So just for clarification, all the other boats, the 9 boats, have all they're either still there with the original owners or they've either been shortened or sold or taken off the lake?
So 5 of the boats have either been shortened or completely removed. Either the owners passed away or what have you. So they've been in compliance. 2 are the original owners that still have the boat, still live at their property. 1 is an original owner, still in our database as the original owner, but he rents his property. The last one is Mr. Holland's boat that's not in compliance.
I'd like to clarify, Nikki, in our staff report, it said 7 property
Right,
owners.
so that is specifically for Lake Audubon, which is Mr. Holland's
Gotcha.
lake.
Okay, so there were 2 others.
Yes, on Lake Ann and Lake Thoreau.
And those are now all conforming or moved?
Yes.
Okay. So all the boats on all the lakes are in compliance except for this one?
Yes.
Whether
And
it's
the one that's
just,
still grandfathered.
yeah, but I still say that's in
Yeah,
compliance.
But yeah,
They've-
agreed, yeah.
So owned by the
Original
owner
owner.
that had the original
That has the exemption.
waiver.
Right, okay,
Yeah, still owned by that owner.
okay.
Is your question all of the boats or just this grouping that we've been talking about with the exception?
The 18-foot applies to all lakes, all boats.
All boats on all lakes.
So all boats on all lakes except for this one comply.
Or
Yeah,
have their
we're
grandfathered in.
Or we're
Yeah,
grandfathered.
grandfathered
Well, I see that as
2008.
complying,
So
yeah.
yeah, there in 1987 there were boats that were originally grandfathered. That grandfathering still exists.
Okay,
And
oh,
then
okay,
in 2008 we identified these owners of
Okay.
oversized boats.
okay, gotcha,
In 2008.
gotcha. Okay,
And the certification to the length is self-certification with when they apply for the boat permit.
So what has happened is the board said RA staff in the 80s come up with a way to enforce these rules. So there was a boat permit registration created. And in that, there's an application where the owners have to say their name, their address, the width and length of their boat, and they're given a permit. And as we go through, those permits do not transfer by person. So a new owner has to get a new permit for their boat. And every time, and even every year, they have to write the size of their boat. So we are taking people's word that the size
So
of their boat-
self-certification.
Yes. So we have started to realize that maybe people aren't being as truthful as we would like them to be. So we are now measuring all the boats in 2007 to see exactly what's out there. And also any new registrations that come on, we don't issue them an approval registration permit unless we go out and verify the length and the width.
Did you mean to say 2007?
Oh, I'm sorry, 2017.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, any other questions for Nikki? You're gonna hang out, right?
Sure.
Okay. So, Mr. Holland.
Adrian Hollins at 11103 Lake Chapel Lane. And I've lived in Reston for 39 years. I love Reston. I really appreciate what Reston Association does for us. Anyway, I'm here because I want to change the rule about the maximum boat length from 18 to 20 feet. I went in originally to get a waiver. I couldn't get a waiver. So I had no choice except to go in and try and change the rule to 20 feet. And my reasoning is, why is it 18 feet? Who picked 18 and for what reason? I'm told the reason was that there are homes on Lake Ann that are 18 feet wide, and they wanted the boats not to exceed the width of those homes. I don't see why you can't, as many do, dock your boats in, bow on, rather than parallel. So then it's only 10 feet instead of, 20 feet or 18. And a lot of people do that, possibly most of them. Orca has been on the lake for 20 years. So Steve Drill actually owned the boat first, and that was transferred to Wally Arcan, my neighbor, about 7 years ago or so. I thought I could make the boat comply. I had no idea what it cost to cut aluminum, and it just didn't make sense to do that. I'd rather not have to sell the boat. I'd like to keep it. I would keep it under a waiver, or I'm happy to see it go to a vote by the Reston Reston residents. Because all the people that I've spoken to, and I think I got petitions out to you all, 32 or 39 of them or something like that. Everybody I asked to read and sign the petition signed it. That was over 2 evenings, 2 days before the actual hearing. Only one person objected because they didn't understand the rule, which is fine. But I believe that if we put it up for a vote, that the residents of Reston would, vote for it. At least the people I know will.
Okay. You do understand that it's not as easy as just taking a vote, right, to change our deed and to change those rules.
I understand
It's a pretty complicated process.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make that clear. If we could just write a piece of paper and everybody sign it, that would be one thing. But it's a pretty intricate, changing the deed or what have you is a pretty in-depth process. Not to say that we shouldn't be looking at things like this. The deed was written so many years ago that every now and then again, we should probably be looking through the deed and saying, what doesn't make sense anymore, some years later, whether it's 10, 20 years later, and we relook at that. So I hear you. I want to ask a process to Sabrina or Kate. We do have some members I think want to comment. So to make this a kind of a conversation, is it okay if we hear some comments? You stay here in case there's questions, and then the board can get into a discussion and we can see where we go from there. Would that be okay? Perfect. So don't go too far.
Relevant question here. What was the cost of compliance?
I'm sorry?
What did when you said you looked into compliance and the costs were too?
It was, roughly $5,000, but could have been more.
Was there, I know a couple people deferred. Was there any comments on this? Tammy?
Tammy Petrine, 2503 Foxcroft Way. This, for me, is a very complicated but very simple situation. I've never seen this gentleman before. I listened to this gentleman. Believe it or not, their comments are their concerns are very linked. For 40 years, I've watched, I'm 70. For 60 years, I've watched crazy stuff happen because there are crazy rules and bureaucrats feel and are compelled to follow the rules. This is a pocketbook issue for me. I have no dog in the fight about boat length. I'm a designer. I will tell you, and please, this is the point I want each director to get. If you are on a lake, you are not going to be able to tell the difference between an 18-foot craft or a 20-foot craft. If you are in a 24-foot room, you will be able to discern that. On a lake, you cannot. This is one of those issues that the RA in the past has been very adamant on certain covenant issues to their detriment. We are paying $1 zillion for communications techniques and PR and glossy magazines, which I love, by the way, but we're paying a lot of money for that. That's coming out of my pocket in my dues. Please consider changing these ideas or giving an exception until you can change the bylaws, because what was appropriate 50 years ago is not appropriate now. And was it ever appropriate on other lakes other than Lake Ann that had the 18-foot, I never heard that, townhouse rule? Please use some common sense. Don't inflame the public over something silly just because you're holding to a rule. I don't like scofflaws. I looked through the packet and saw person after person signing, we don't mind this boat. Please, you can't tell the difference. Don't make this a federal case. Thank you.
Thank you.
As a point of disclosure, I have had absolutely zero discussion with Tammy about this. So when it comes time to me pretty much reiterating what she just said, it was not orchestrated. Thank you.
Any other community comment?
I didn't know that you were talking about this tonight, so this is very short notice, but I would like to say that...
We need your name
A
and...
little closer to the mic, please.
I would like to say that...
Your name and address?
We need name and address.
I'm Karen Noel, and I live at 11426 Waterview Cluster. And I've been on the lake since 1984. And I don't have a boat myself. I have a lower dock. But anyway, I have noticed over the years that everything changes, and the boats get bigger, and they get faster, and they get noisier, and they get more and more crowded. And Lake Ann is not getting any bigger, and it already has enough boats to cross the water on them when they are all out. So I don't know, what I don't know is why you wouldn't enforce it. I don't understand why there is even a question about it. There's no good reason to permit larger boats, because after a while it starts to matter. You may not know that it's 20 feet instead of 18 feet or something like that, but you know that they're getting bigger and faster and noisier. And that is a problem for those of us who actually have our backyard as water. So anyway, I ask you, why would you change it, actually? Why would you not enforce it?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You live on Lake Ann? What's that correct?
I live on Lake Ann.
Yeah, Lake
Okay.
Ann.
Any other community comment on this topic? Erwin?
My name is Erwin Flashman. I live at 1327 Buttermilk Lane. I do not live on a lake. I own no boat. I have no horse in this race, except that we live in a society that is governed by law and rules of law, and we obey them. And you are committed to that. You have a deed, which is a restrictive covenant. The courts do not favor restrictive covenants. If you fail to enforce your covenants, you risk the next time you go to court having the court say, oh, but you don't enforce it yourself and you're asking the court to do that. Sorry, goodbye. That will undercut the Reston Association's authority and this board's authority. Secondly, Mr. Hollins knew when he bought the boat that it was non-compliant. He's now unhappy because it's going to cost him $5,000 or more to repair it or to put it into compliance. He is in essence asking this board to authorize a referendum to change the rule, and that referendum will cost all of us a lot more than $5,000. So he is saying to you and me and everyone else, pay for my boat. I will not pay for that boat. And if you authorize it, you will get that less in my payment. This forum is a hearing on his appeal. A discussion of a referendum is totally inappropriate at this stage. He has come at the wrong time asking for a referendum. If he wanted a referendum, he should have been up front and come and asked for a referendum. He should have known that long ago. He chose not to. He waited until covenants came after him. This is not something that is known as good faith. You owe it to the people you employ who follow your rules and seek to enforce them as you direct them to do so, to honor their decisions when they have done it properly. Covenants has found that he does not comply. The Covenants Committee has found that he does not comply. That is his vote. And you ought to enforce your own rules. You have actually no choice but to do that. He has offered no substantial, substantive reason that would show that the rule does not apply to his boat. And therefore, you must deny his appeal. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Alan Barrow. I live on Lane Lane. Many of you, I suspect, knew John Elshadi, who unfortunately died not long ago. John lived on Lake Anne. John had a pontoon boat. John had a brazier on his pontoon boat. John made great Italian food on his pontoon boat. John sold and served it all around the lake. It was one of the great experiences. It violated every covenant that you guys have, but he was actually fun. Another observation, that was the best presentation on administrative law that I've ever heard, about standing, about how to use the law to make a simple situation as complex as possible. You just heard a presentation that lets us all know why fewer lawyers would be much better for all of us. Thank you.
Okay.
Erwin, your rebuttal. I said your rebuttal.
That makes two people speaking my mind. I'm wondering if they're hacking my email or something. You guys Russians or something?
Any other community comment on the topic? Okay. So in our packet, we basically have three options, as we know. We can deny the appeal. We can move to grant the appeal and grant the waiver. Or we can refer Mr. Hollins back to covenants for reconsideration, given there's additional information that they have to consider. So those are basically our three options,
Unless we propose another option.
Unless there's another option out there.
What are the facts that covenants didn't have?
I don't know. I don't
think option 3 is actually on the table because the presentation tonight was pretty much what the covenants committee.
What covenants said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So I know there's some discussion to be had here because I've been told there is. So do we want to do what Ellen used to do and do a round robin kind of thing, or just kind of a free for all? It's up to let's just go around. How about that? Does that work, Mike?
Well, must we go in order, or could people speak as?
That's normally what a round means. You go you go in kind of an order, but we. So. Do you not want to go first then, John? Because
I will. I have agonized over this issue for several days. Spent a lot of time on it, and many of the comments that others have made are conclusions that I've come to. Let me summarize. I won't go through all of the intricacies of my argumentation with myself, but let me go through my main conclusions. First of all, the boat's previous owner, Mr. Arkayan, and its current owner, Mr. Hollins, themselves created the present enforcement problem. By knowingly disregarding RA notices of the boat's nonconformity, its limited temporary exception, and the subsequent liability of a future buyer. As indicated in the RA staff report, Mr. Arkayan was told twice by RA in POAA sale disclosure letters prior to the sale of his boat, the boat's violation and of any buyer's inheritance of that violation. Staff states that on or about August 30th, 2016, Mr. Hollins, who bought Mr. Arkayan's boat but not his house, acknowledged to RA staff that he was aware of the size requirements. So this is not a hardship created by staff or by the covenants committee, but by the buyer and seller of the boat. Secondly, staff acted appropriately in subsequent violation notifications to Mr. Hollins in December 2016, January 2017, and March 2017. Thirdly, the Covenants Committee acted appropriately in its April 19, 2017 hearing, in which it found Mr. Hollins' vote in violation of the original temporary exception in 2008. Fourth, on May 19, 2017, Mr. Hollins exercised his right to appeal the finding to the board. We agreed to hear it on June 22nd. The fact that 36 to 38 neighbors support Mr. Hollins' appeal, while significant, is not an adequate justification for the board's granting his request for an extension of the temporary exception. Decisions based on an applicant's popular support violates an unpopular applicant's equal protection. Sixth, I'm concerned with broader equal protection issues with three of Mr. Hollins' neighbors, William Stoney, who shortened his boat to conform with the guidelines, and Richard and Arlene Gorell, and James Brinkley and Francis Bastris, whose boats have not been modified but are still covered by the original temporary exception. Though one of the scanned neighbor support letters for Mr. Hollins' appeal was illegible, I did not see any three of those households represented in the support letters. But it's irrelevant to our decision because equal protection is what we're bound to do as a board. I am open to the possibility that RA should consider increasing the permitted boat length, and especially should Mr. Hollins and Ms. Hartke's historical interpretation be correct. The historical interpretation was that because townhouse lot widths were only 18 feet, that Lake Ann, which had the first boats, set the standard for an 18-foot length. I have no idea whether that's true or not. But anyway, in any case, that's always a factual, that's always an assessment that could be looked at. However, this would apparently require an RA member referendum. Am I correct, Mr. Chadwick, that this would be a material amendment and therefore would require an amendment?
It would.
Okay.
Of the Reston deed.
Now, and this is a bit more controversial, and I'm not sure I agree with myself. I'm open to the possibility that a temporary exception that runs with the property, that is with the boat, rather than with the owner, might be appropriate in the case of boats. So in zoning law, my understanding of zoning law is that, for example, grandfathering runs with the property, not with the owner. So if you have a house that is used in a certain way, it's no longer legal if they would want to start it again, but it was legal when it started, and I buy the house, I get the grandfathered rights in zoning. This is not a zoning ordinance. And so I'm not sure that I would apply that, but that would be an interesting prospect. So where the two options that I've come down with, other than outright denial, which is a possibility, would be to refer the case back to Covenants Committee, not questioning their decision because their decision was correct, in my view, but rather requesting their judgment on two issues. Whether the temporary exemption should be revised for all RA boat owners to run with the property, that is the boats, rather than with the owner, but only for all boats introduced on RA lakes no later than December 2008, which was the date of the Covenants Committee decision, and continually present except for repairs and inspections since then. So a second alternative would be whether the Covenants Committee, with the advice of staff, believes there are reasonable grounds for proposing new maximum boat dimensions to be considered in a future referendum, and if so, whether Mr. Holland should be granted a temporary exemption to keep boat 1550 on Lake Audubon until the results of that referendum are determined, providing that he agrees to an enforceable agreement to remove that boat immediately if the referendum fails. So I have three options, and I'm not sure which of my options I agree with. Outright denial, or asking the Covenants Committee to consider the two amendments, the two actions that I just outlined. But this is not the fault of staff. This is not the fault of the Covenants Committee. This is the fault of the buyer and seller of the boat. They created this problem.
Thank you, John. That was very thorough, as one would expect from you. So we'll just continue.
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Chadwick.
Okay.
So Erwin had mentioned that if we are to allow this boat to continue, basically not enforcing our covenants, what sort of deep trouble might that get us into in the future for the enforcement of our covenants that, whether people like them or not, are part of our covenants?
I would suggest for me to answer that question in open session is something that the board is going to have to authorize me to do, because it involves a potential case in controversy and litigation.
Okay.
That I think the board would be better advised to hear my comments with regard to the law in executive session. If that's otherwise, the board can ask me to do it in open session, but I think that would not necessarily be in the best interest of the association.
Okay, fair enough. I think I'd like to know that answer before we vote by the by. The other question I have is for Kate. Approximately how much does it cost us to have a referendum if we were to do the referendum in conjunction with an election?
So in addition to just conducting the referendum itself,
So if we were trying to piggyback onto something else to try to reduce the cost of a referendum?
you need to include the cost of community input sessions as well as advertising for this, because you would need to get community input on this. an important fact for you to know is that this particular section of the deed was considered in 2003 in advance of the referendum to amend the deed, which happened in over 2005 and 2006. And as opposed to eliminating this particular covenant, it was actually strengthened to include the width of boats and the use of the term motorized. So that was considered and put to community comment throughout the community, not just in Lake Ann, but throughout the community. So I want you to be mindful of that it was considered recently, and a change was made to the deed to strengthen this particular covenant. To answer your question,
2006.
I'm sorry, apologize, 2006. But
when was it?
In 2006 is when the deed was finally approved, as well as the changes to the Articles of Incorporation and the bylaws. All three were done at one time. But it was over a course of a 4-year period that all of the provisions of all three of those documents were considered, and lots of community input was obtained in advance of that.
So was the change to the width, or was the addition of the width of the boat a community suggestion? Do you remember?
I would have to go back and look at my notes on that.
There was ample time during public hearings for people to give input, and that was the ultimate result.
Okay. Yeah. In 2006.
That was the referendum timeframe, but over a 3-year period,
And
all
it took
of the
us 3
provisions
years
were
to get
considered.
all of those bits.
But the vote was on in 2006.
Yes.
I would like to suggest we maybe look at this as even more simpler than this one request, is that are we as a board, do we feel that it is our job to uphold the deed and the covenances that we have said, that's why we're on the board, to uphold the deeds and the rules of Reston Association? For me, that's the question tonight. It's not about a boat, it's not about when they were changed, it's about what we have today, and is that our job as a board of directors to do that? For me, the answer is pretty clear, but I kind of want to change the conversation from 16, 15, 14, 13, whatever, to is it our job to do that? And if it is, and we say, yes, that's our job, of course there's exceptions to the rule for extenuating circumstances. Does this rise to the level of that kind of thing? And that to me is the second question. So we can talk about boats, all day, but for me, it really comes down to that. So comments on that comment?
I think that's the heart of what I'm trying to get at here, and the two questions I have is that I don't necessarily object to the idea that the deed gets changed or that we look into that, but if we're going to look into that, how much is that going to cost us? What are the implications of us doing it?
It's going to cost us money, it's going to cost us time, and we have to think about all the other things within the deed. We would look at it, I think we would look at it more holistically than just one thing at a time, because to change the deed is not something we do overnight. It takes, Kate was telling me just yesterday, it can take years to get that actually done. And so, unless we had several things I think that we would want to look at, we have to take that decision, very seriously as well. So, Julie.
I agree that there's really only one decision that we're faced with tonight is, grant the appeal and the exception continues or deny. There's a secondary thing that I don't think we need to take up tonight, because I think it goes into that question that I've kind of heard murmurs of, that there might be some other things that would come into question that we might wish to do as a referendum. So to me, that's a secondary piece, and we could make a decision tonight that we wish to establish a task force to look at potential referendum items or deed changes and whether or not the boat length width falls into that. We heard from Kate tonight that previously, when it came up, it didn't make the grade. Well, it may not make the grade again, but I don't think that's what we have to decide tonight.
I agree.
But part of, I think, our ability to answer the question is related to an answer we need from Mr. Chadwick that is probably best, per his advice, done in executive session. Because if we grant this appeal and we grant a new grandfathering in of this vote, what trouble is that going to get us into down the road that we're not foreseeing?
Again, I go back to the question, is it our job to uphold our deed as it is today? We're talking about today, not the future, today, to uphold our own rules. I mean, I think, I don't know who, was it Irwin or somebody talked about, I mean, isn't that our job? Now, that's for the board to decide.
Can we continue around the horn, please?
Are you done, Victoria?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know our time is limited and we have a non-controversial agenda, but on this particular item, I do want to spend some time. What's really important to me, and what I think should be important to everybody, is to adhere common sense and what's in the best interest of the community. And Tammy and Alan, I want to thank you, so you can cut my presentation down 5 minutes by just incorporating their comments into mine, if you would, Sabrina. I agree with both of what they said completely. We're not the Supreme Court. And to say that somehow we have to be the guardians of this strict rule written 50 some odd years ago on each and every issue, or else, holy mackerel, we're in legal non-compliance and we're going to be sued and all of this kind of stuff. This is opening us up to incredible bureaucracy and will make the Bulgarian Bureau of Compliance look like a free market Ayn Rand type of a situation. We can't go there. And, this is just another case of compliance gotcha. And I want to agree with John. The staff is acting appropriately. The Covenants Committee is acting appropriately based on how they're set up to run, how their management team is telling them to operate. And the bigger issue here, and it's a much bigger issue that we need to address immediately, is why are we spending so many hours and so much money on a Covenants Committee to sit on issues like this when there are major Covenants issues throughout Reston that we all know about, and many that we don't, that are totally ignored. And it's always, we don't have the jurisdiction, or we don't have the staff, or blah, 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 to do that. And I can give you dozens of specific examples. I had one today. But I'll just give you one. And most of you know that I'm in real estate. About maybe 9 months ago or so, I was showing a very exclusive property on the lake that had a home to its right that was also on the lake. I was the buyer agent, not the listing agent. If I was the listing agent, I would have said something about this, but it's not my place. While we're on the deck looking at the beautiful lake, gorgeous home, over $1 million, the guy looks next door, and underneath the deck of the neighbor is a rider mower that looks like it's 10 years old. It's rusted out. There's obviously been oil leaking. There's a blue tarp that, I say blue, it was probably once blue. It's been weathered for years and years, and all sorts of garden equipment, and just garbage, and a lot of lead, and a lot of iron. And you could see the pathway from his house to the lake. There's no grass, there's nothing. This is on our lakes, on $1 million plus house. This should not happen. So, of course, the prospective buyer says, not interested. If that's my neighbor and that's the situation, I have no interest in this property. Economically, I understand. But where's our environmental people? We're busy citing people for all sorts of covenants things. not this. I called our covenants people. I called our CEO. I reported this, and I was told to fill out 1 million forms and get neighbors. This is not my house. I'm not the listing agent. I was told to do all these things before they would even consider it. They wouldn't even send somebody over to look at this place for an obvious major violation. And I'm not talking about a $200,000 townhouse. I'm not talking about something a cluster could handle, because it wasn't a cluster. It's a house on the lake right there. They wouldn't do anything about it. But when you go to sell a house around here, that's the only time they'll ever even look at your house. And people who are selling their house, for the most part, they're fixing them up. They look great. The exterior's been taken care of for the most part. But when you go to sell a house, Covenants has to review it. They're always, I don't care if you have the Taj Mahal. I have an obvious example I'm not going to give you now that everybody here knows about. It's going to cost you money to do things that don't necessarily have to be done. They're questionable. It doesn't matter. They will find something. There will be 2 or 3 things. It will have to go to DRB. You cannot close on a sale in Reston in a month or less because of that, no matter how good a shape your house is in. That's not changed. It's not going to change. All I hear is that's the rules. And falling back on that's the deed. You know, I think we use the deed as a crutch to never do anything sometimes. But this is nonsense. We focus the covenant's time on that type of thing, on houses that are already in great shape. I had another case today showing a house with the same thing. The guy looked at the neighbor's property, said, why don't they do something about this, that, and the other? It was obviously in disrepair. I can go around all town. I'm not talking about any one section of town. I've seen it in all sections of town. John, you mentioned that to me when you were running for office, and you saw a lot of houses like that, that nothing is done about it. You have to go through such a bureaucratic process to get them to look at anything beyond what they are commissioned to do by the boss right now. So yeah, they're acting appropriately. If I'm working on a salary job and somebody's telling me to do something, I do what they tell me to do. But what we're telling them to do, what we're directing them to do is totally off base. We have a lot of covenants issues in here, and we're worried about a guy with a 20-foot boat that all of the neighbors are okay with. The neighbors probably benefit from it. Alan was talking about the guy that goes out there and has spaghetti dinners and all kinds of other violations. That happens every weekend. People are out there on these rafts doing things that technically are illegal. We say nothing about it, and nobody complains, and everybody has fun, and nobody's in danger. It's common sense. You have boats, we have lakes, they're there for the people's recreation and enjoyment as long as it's safe. We all know this. So why we want to tie this into bureaucratic nightmares and all these legalities and talk about referendums? Of course we don't need a referendum. I thank John for at least throwing something out about grandfathering running with the property. That's what creative legal people do. There's always 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways to look at it. You look at the objective, what makes sense? How do we get to the place that makes sense? And if what we need to do to get to the place that makes sense is say, let's grandfather them in the way that John mentioned, then let's do it that way. I don't care what the methodology is. I just want the result to be common sense and what's in the best interest of the community. And in my mind, using this as an example, that we're way off base right now in how our covenants operates. It has nothing to do with the staff. It has nothing to do with they're doing what they're told to do. I'm saying that what they're told to do has needed to change and does need to change. And that's my position. And I don't care how you do it. I'll say that we'll do it John's way. We'll grandfather this thing in. There's not any boats behind them that we have to worry about that somebody's going to jump in. Oh, we give it to this guy. His boat's bigger than my boat, and I'm going to want to make my boat big. We're not going to have any of that. This is it. This is the only boat covered. There's only, a few listed on the whole thing here. It's no big deal. It's going to be, as soon as we say, okay, it's going to be dead. The community is going to be fine with it. Nobody cares. So no, we're not going to spend a lot of money getting referendums of this. We've already spent way too many hours on this. I can imagine the kinds of things that covenants could have done with the same amount of time. I can, if you don't believe me, get in my car one day and drive around, get in my business. I'll show you 5 or 6 of them without even blinking an eye in a day. Things we should be doing. And that's common sense, and that's the direction I think we need to be going. So thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Mike?
Thank you. I'd like to make 4 points.
Very brief comments, right?
Very brief. First
Ray
point,
used
actually
all
I'm going
the
to make
time.
5 points. We should be finished this item at 7:50, and we're 10 minutes over.
Yes.
But the other substantive points I want to make is, number one, the covenant staff appear to be enforcing the rules that we set for the covenant staff, and that's really, really important. Sherry, I think that you raised a good point. You know, do we uphold the rules? Or, and I think Victoria had said this, you know, what is the mechanism for changing them so that we're flexible and adaptable? And I like the idea of connecting it to a vote and perhaps a referendum. I suspect that there are many issues on an annual basis that we could tie to the vote in order to address some of these issues when they don't comply with the deed and otherwise. You know, we put rules in place in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization. If we willy-nilly change them, depending on what comes before us, it's chaos. So I like the idea of following rules. Also like to have a relatively simple, inexpensive process, but thoughtful process that allows us to evolve as the community does. So I too would like to know, you know, what are the possibilities? How do we go about making these changes? And when do they rise to the point where we ought to really take this on? And I'm not sure that boat length really does. Final point is, you know, Tammy, Ray, to certainly, let's apply common sense. You know, if this was a new boat coming onto the lake, it exceeded, that would be one thing. It's a boat that was on the lake, is currently on the lake, a neighbor happens to want the boat. That certainly would weigh into my decision.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. Very good. So I like to look at things from a proportionality perspective. You know, when having listened to, you know, so many of you, Tammy and Alan, and, you know, the board time should not be locked up by these kinds of issues as much as it is getting locked up. I think from a deed perspective, we need to be a little bit more flexible. We need to find ways in which we can apply flexibility. You know, in situations like this, is it a, you know, even if it's a temporary denial, right? How do we find a way to address these kinds of issues, either through a penalty structure, fee structure that addresses it without raising it? Because there's not material enough to come up to the board and take up so much time. But at the same time, we do need to enforce the deed, right? But that's where the flexibility comes in. I think we need to find ways, you know, to do that. And clearly, you know, I've commented to at least some of the board members previously that we need to be reviewing the deed on an annual basis. There should be either the governance committee or a task force should be reviewing this on an annual basis, and we should be teeing up as part of the annual ballot elections, the things that need to go through these kinds of common sense changes so that we don't get to these situations. We also need to, you know, as part of, you know, governance administration, build in the flexible remedy structure instead of this, you know, all or nothing, right? You know, goes to the types of issues that Ray is talking about. You will find violations. Maybe we need to have some flexibility built in so that you impose a penalty or there is a fee, even if it is on a post facto basis, rather than blocking the whole thing and jeopardizing a transaction for somebody, right? So I think I'd really like for us to move in that direction. This is a longer term issue. I don't know how long you would use the board, Mr. Holland, but this is a longer term issue, and so I would rather approach this from a long term perspective, right, and see how we can address this. It may not be in this meeting, but I think as a board, these are the types of things that we should really get out of, off of our table, so that we address only material issues. Thank you.
So I hate this because it's a dumb arbitrary number. And it's stupid times 3 whoever put this in our deed of all places. This should be something that a board resolution should deal with. It should be lake specific because Lake Audubon, for instance, is twice the size of Lake Erie. I'm also moved by the idea that if we choose which covenants we want to enforce on a case-by-case basis, we're going to become a court.
Yeah.
And I promise you, if somebody ever stands there and asks me to decide what's puce versus pink, I'm going to shoot them or me or all of us. I don't want us to do that. Erwin's right. It's going to take us down a slippery slope where when somebody doesn't want to enforce something, they're going to say, you chose not to enforce it in the past because you thought it was dumb. But if I can find enough people to think that's dumb, we're going to court on this. And I don't want us to go there either. I'm open to changing this as a package of changes to our covenants and deeds. But that's not happening tonight. As far as tonight, I'm for denying the petition. He knew it wasn't in compliance. The simple answer is take it off the lake and put it in storage, and if we have a referendum and we change it, bring it back on the lake. But you knew it wasn't in compliance, and you knew this is where this was going to go. And I can't undermine what our covenants. This is stupid, but we can't undermine the covenants because we're going to open ourselves to a raft of legal problems. The right answer is change the covenants. We have a process for doing so, and we should pursue that. But I don't think we can put ourselves in limbo until we get to that day, because it doesn't resolve the issue. And I'm very sympathetic to the others who have had to do this, and I know people who have had to incur this expense, and it's pricey. But that's what we've asked of everybody else.
Julie?
My question's really quick. Do I understand it correctly, back to John's point of possibly suggesting that that original group of, what was it, 7 or 9? I don't know how many it was grandfathered anymore. If we were to say, well, let me ask this, does the board have the right to make a motion and pass that we change the grandfathering, which was a covenant proposal, if I remember correctly, to the boat specific, back to the property of the boat, not the house or the owner, but that particular boat, number whatever it is, 1550, that would, because there's 4 remaining out of that group, Nikki, right?
3.
3. So that it would really only apply to the 3 that were left, that we would say those particular boats, number 1550 and number would be able to remain on the lake as an exception. That's not a deed change, right? That's, if I'm reading correctly, we have the power to enforce any decision or amend, modify, repeal. But have I interpreted something incorrectly?
I would suggest to you, as I responded to Victoria, that the board has the right to do anything it wants to do. The board is in total control here. However, I think the board would be well advised to have legal counsel before it makes any decision tonight.
All right, I still, back to my original, it's pretty clear cut.
David?
Appeal.
You with us still?
Sherry?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Sherry, this is David.
Yes. Hi, David.
I make a motion that we deny the appeal.
Okay. Any more discussion on that? He went right.
Who seconded it? Okay.
That's just a vote for option 1 is what he's saying.
Yeah. Okay, so any more
So that's
discussion
not
on that
really
before we
a
call for the vote?
May I ask David a question? David, you prefer to move to the motion, you have, obviously, move to the motion immediately without the benefit of legal counsel's advice. But that is your intent to do so, I gather.
That's correct.
And it's been seconded. Any other questions or comments before we go to a vote? We're at a vote. Okay, so all in favor of the motion to deny?
Can I propose an amendment?
Friendly amendment.
Yes, I guess.
I'd like to add a fourth option, which basically says that, we deny for the appeal for now, but we also, the board commits to start a process.
I would say that's a separate motion.
Why does that have to be a separate one? Can we?
Well, we can reject your friendly
Right.
amendment.
It would depend upon
Yes, it depends on David's.
whether he's willing to accept that as a friendly
Okay,
amendment.
all right. David?
No, I would prefer that that be separate after the vote on this one.
Okay, so the motion is to deny the appeal.
That's not really a motion, it's a vote on option one.
Well, he made the motion, he made the motion for option one to deny the appeal. And it was seconded. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 So we're saying that in the middle of the summertime, this
What was the
vote.
vote?
Make it clear.
Anybody? Any opposed? Did you
I'm
get all the
opposed.
A's?
No, let's go through, what are we voting for, option one or option two?
We voted for option, the motion was we denying the appeal.
Well, that's not a motion, it's a vote for option one, am I right or wrong?
He just made the motion.
Motion.
Yes.
Do it by option. I made a motion.
Right, yeah.
Made a motion, it was
What
seconded.
motion's already here? I just wanted to be very clear what everybody's voting for.
Yes.
Option one, move to deny the appeal of Mr. Hollins, owner of the property, and enforce the boat length requirement. Does that mean that he has to get this boat out of the lake tomorrow, weekend, nobody gets to use it? Where are we on this?
I think we're voting on
That's separate
option
and
one.
apart from the motion.
I still would like an answer, I'm sure he would, and so would all the neighbors and other people who are enjoying his boat would like an answer on that too.
Well, we're in the
I'm
middle.
voting in favor of option two, I'm probably the only one that's
We're
voting.
not on option two, we're still trying to get through the first motion. The motion is, and it's been voted on, the A's. Do you have all that, Sabrina?
I want to double check.
David.
How did you vote?
I said yes.
You said yes, okay. And
Victoria.
did any, and now?
And are there any nays? Is there any objections or noes?
Ray, did you vote nay?
No,
Schroeder.
Are you not voting?
no, I'm voting no.
Okay, no, so he's a nay.
Okay,
To
Did you
deny,
vote?
yep.
So 8 yes, 1 no.
okay.
Thank you.
So the motion passes. Okay.
Motion passes. I would suggest that we get legal counsel. We're going into executive session later to talk about another step to the deed changing process to take account of all that. So I would defer that comment to when we go into executive session. Is that okay, Ken?
I'd certainly like for us to, to communicate something in that regard sooner rather than later.
And I think we all need to hear
but I think
what
we need
legal
to-
counsel has to say on that before we craft a motion to do that.
So what you're saying is option one passes,
Correct.
is that correct?
Correct, one.
8 to 1. Thank you, I'm proud to be the one, by the way.
Okay.
Tammy and Alan, thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to move on to environmental, a whole different topic. So Doug, I saw you come in, is going to give us a condensed version of the condensed executive summary. Very long report. I did ask all the board members to read it, the 25-page executive summary, and to come with questions for you. Because I told them they were going to get the very Reader's Digest version of your presentation to the BOC.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Doug.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm really excited to unveil our final Reston Annual State of the Environment Report that looks at 16 environmental attributes for our community. This is the final report. It is now done. It's 900 pages, 190 pages when you include the executive summary. So it's going to be difficult to do razor justice presenting the findings of 190 pages in 15 minutes. So I kindly ask you to hold your questions for the end, and I'll be really happy to to address them at that time.
I just want to note that the folks that left already heard this once, so it wasn't that they didn't care. I just want people that might be watching to know that it wasn't lack of caring as they heard it at the Bach meeting.
As background, again, the board did task the Environmental Advisory Committee last June to prepare a report on the environmental quality of our community. And the committee embarked on that in the fall of 2016 by putting together a 9-person voluntary task force called the Racer Working Group. And since then, to complete this report, we put in over 1,000 hours. There are
Which we greatly appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you.
It shows.
There are 5 objectives to this report. I'm not going to go through these because I think they were well talked about in the executive summary. And how well we accomplish these, the future's yet to show us. But I do want to say that we have actually accomplished 2 of them already. We have now developed a first environmental baseline from which we can judge future changes to our environmental quality. And 2, we have compiled in one place, easily accessible, over 200 scientific references and databases relevant to the environmental health of Reston. So I think those 2 things alone are going to have a tremendous value to Reston as we go forward. This is the organization of the report, and for the rest of my presentation, I'm just going to focus on that area in white, the actual environmental attributes of the community that we evaluated. We use traffic light icons to show the status of each attribute, whether it's good, fair, or poor quality, and an unlit traffic light when we don't have enough information to make a determination. I want to make sure everybody understands, however, that these classifications are strictly qualitative. They're based on the judgment of the Racer group based on the data available. I'm not going to also go into the environmental settings chapter. I think that was synopsized well in the executive summary as well, but I want to make one point, and that is we're expecting 1.5 million more people in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area that includes Reston in the next 30 years. That kind of population growth is going to have both direct and indirect effects on the environmental quality of our community. So let's go right away into the first environmental attribute, air quality. You see we gave it a green light. It's good, and we say that because currently we meet all the national ambient air quality standards, and each of those environmental contaminants are coming down year after year, and that's been going on for more than a decade. We expect continuing air quality into the future. These are the recommendations we have. Those recommendations were all spelled out in the executive summary. So for this presentation, I won't dwell on the recommendations with few exceptions. But I do want to make it clear to everybody that many of these recommendations, some of them you have purview over as a board. Many of these you don't. They're the responsibility of homeowners, business owners, and other government authorities like Fairfax County. Now let's turn to water resources. We have 4 components of that we evaluated. The first one is our streams here in Reston. You see we gave that a poor quality red stoplight. And that's because many are seriously degraded, as the picture shows. That's an influent stream that feeds Lake Newport that was just taken a few weeks ago. The channel widening and bank erosion and the loss of trees in our floodplains, those are common problems throughout our watersheds. And we have 66 miles of perennial streams in Reston. It's not all bad news. Some of the stream restoration efforts in the Glade and Colvin Run and Snake Den Branch are now showing improvements in stream hydrology and physical habitat, but we don't see any improvement in the stream biology yet. With regard to our lakes and ponds, we give that a yellow light, fair status. And the reason being is that they do offer good recreational opportunities. They have a lot of wildlife habitat benefits and increase the biodiversity of our community. But they also have problems. Sediment accumulation from those degraded streams we just talked about requires expensive and periodic dredging of all 4 of our major lakes and some of our ponds. They also are suffering from nutrient enrichment, a process known as cultural eutrophication, which leads to increased algal blooms, nuisance weeds, and poor water quality, especially with oxygen deficits in the depths. These are our recommendations. I will note on this one that we're recommending to conduct a fishery survey, and the Environmental Advisory Committee has already requested a budget item for that. The last time a fishery survey was done in the community was over a decade ago, and 3 of our 4 lakes were identified as having an unbalanced fishery. So it's about time we reassess that, and hopefully we'll see some improvements have happened in the past decade. Stormwater management, I'm afraid, is another area we had to give a red light. When Reston was developed, there were very few environmental guidelines, so developers typically diverted stormwater from parking lots and impervious surfaces like buildings directly into the nearest stream, and our streams couldn't handle that capacity. Since then, the county has developed more rigorous stormwater management regulations, and new development is required to meet those, including no increase in stormwater volume and a reduction in 20% of pollution loads. So one of the recommendations we have is don't allow developers to get grandfathered in and waived from that new requirement. Advocate for that. I mean, there's nothing you can do but advocate. And our final water resource topic is drinking water. We get our water here from the Potomac River through Fairfax Water Authority, and it meets all 17 federal and state standards, and they test for over 170 other chemicals of potential concern, and no problems have been found to date, so we have no recommendations here. Now we'll turn to the vegetation sector, and we're going to look at 3 elements. Tree canopy, and we give that a fair status for Reston, in part because Reston is 50% tree covered right now. The county has a county-wide goal of 53% canopy, and the county probably is in the high 30% right now. So Reston is way ahead of the curve in our tree canopy, and trees provide tremendous number of beneficial ecological services, but they are affected by invasive species. So 38% of our urban forest plots are dominated right now by invasive plants. They also are threatened from overbrowsing by deer and other threats like insect pests and unauthorized tree removal and dumping in the woods. Meadows, we have a number of meadows, 50 in Reston. They're all small, and they typically undergo ecological succession, which means they revert, if they're not maintained, to forest community eventually. So you have to manage them actively to keep them in a meadow status. We encourage, wherever possible, for native plantings instead of turf grass to increase the number of meadows. Wetlands is given the black light. We just don't have enough information. Our wetlands are unquantified and unmapped. They're typically very small, but very important ecologically because they filter pollutants, control stormwater, and provide a lot of wildlife habitat. On the screen is the Sunrise Valley Park wetland. It is the largest wetland in Reston. It's potentially the most valuable. It's used a lot because of the boardwalk for education programs. But it's declining. Its diversity is impacted from invasive species. You do not manage this. Mass Mutual Life Insurance manages this. So one of our recommendations for wetlands is that Reston request management of this potentially very valuable piece of property. Now we'll turn to wildlife, and there's several components we evaluated with respect to birds. We consider it fair status, primarily because we have 150 birds species supported here in Reston, but we really, and several of them are also species of greatest conservation need as considered by the state's Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. But we don't have good data at all on what the real threats are to the birds in Reston. Turning to mammals, another area where we have a black light. We don't have much information on our mammals. The image there is one of our 3 resident beavers that lives down in the Glade Valley at the present time. We have deer, beaver monitored, but other than that, we don't know much. So our recommendations are typically to get more information about the mammals that inhabit our community. Invertebrates, that's a monarch butterfly, one of the continent-wide threatened species that migrates to Mexico. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Invertebrates are the most common animals in the world, but again, we have little information on their populations or diversity in Reston. One laudable thing about Reston, however, we're one of only 4 communities in the state that has accepted the National Wildlife Federation pledge to build monarch way stations to plant the host plants for their caterpillars, the milkweed, to help this threatened species. Reptiles and amphibians, again, a black light. We know that there's 16 amphibian species and 20 reptile species, but otherwise, we really don't know what we have, where they live, or how well they're faring. So our recommendations are to come up with innovative ways to help inventory the pertiles, as they're called, when you combine the 2 in our environment. The last wildlife topic we addressed is Reston's management issues. We have management plans here for deer, Canadian geese, beaver, and when we need it, we bring out mosquito control. We have good, experienced staff on hand to deal with other problems when they come up on a case-by-case basis. So our recommendations here are really to continue the management programs already in hand. Moving to hazardous and toxic waste, we give that a green light, primarily because there are few identified issues with Reston. The most common problems we have are probably oil spills from underground storage tanks and minor spills into our stormwater drains. Our recommendations do include additional education on the risks of using coal tar-based asphalt seal coats that contain human carcinogens and are toxic to aquatic life, and some have been found in the sediments of our lakes. With regard to light pollution, we give that a fair status, primarily because the current guidelines do not address light's effects on humans, wildlife, or plants. Part of our recommendation is to develop new lighting guidelines in collaboration with the Lighting Task Force that's looking at the placement of lights in Reston, and the Environmental Advisory Committee that's looking at the effects of lighting in Reston. I'll mention here also the Environmental Advisory Board has put in a budget request for a lighting specialist to help develop these new guidelines. And the last topic is education and outreach. And this is a green light. I think it's particularly good here in Reston. We've got great experienced staff with a lot of diversity of programs. In 2016, there were 470 different environmental outreach programs run by Reston Association, and 23,500 people were contacted by that. For a community of our size, that's pretty powerful statistics. So with that conclusion of a summary of the major environmental attributes, I have one postscript that I'd like to provide. When we got to the point of drafting the final full report, it came to our attention that advances in health science recently have shown the further benefits, both in physically and mentally, to contact with nature. Turns out humanity needs this interaction. And this need has been given a term, biophilia. Consequently, it dawned on us, regardless of how we rated those individual environmental attributes, good, bad, or fair, their full potential benefit won't be realized if we don't connect them to the people. And that connectivity is exactly where Reston excels, with our pathways that lead people to open areas, to our natural areas, and to the education and outreach programs. Several large progressive cities around the world are embracing this concept of connectivity. They're adopting new approaches to urban planning and urban densification. The head of the University of Virginia's School of Architecture and Urban Planning has developed a program to put these progressive cities together so they can share their ideas, their lessons learned, and to enable their municipalities to better benefit their residents and to become more resilient to future environmental challenges. Personally, I can't think of a better long-term strategy for a community like Reston, which by intent and design is biophilic, to be able to share those experiences with cities such as Singapore and Edmonton, Canada, and Wellington, New Zealand, and San Francisco, New York, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, which are all part of this network. So the RACER Working Group and the full Environmental Advisory Committee strongly encourage Reston Association to apply to be a community partner in this network. And with that, I conclude with two requests to the board: that you accept the executive summary you have all had opportunity to read of RACER, and direct staff to publish the full report as a web-enabled online version on the RA website, and then to direct the Environmental Advisory Committee to come back this fall to discuss the individual recommendations in more detail, where we can talk about prioritization, timelines, and perhaps even implementation strategies. So with that, I'm willing to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
I'd like to move on those two motions. I would like to also thank the Environmental Advisory Committee and staff, in particular Claudia, for moving this forward. It's been a discussion for some time. I'm just so pleased to see this report. I think that the lights, three colors, make it very, very clear where we are. The recommendations are clear and actionable. So thank you.
I'd like to second his motion.
Just to clarify, is that for both motions in the packet as one?
Yep.
Yes.
Is it seconded? Any further discussion on it?
I just found it extraordinary and beautifully written.
So all in favor of both of those motions together?
Aye.
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. I do have another suggestion, perhaps, is that this would be from Mike Leone, who's in the back, not looking at us. That maybe we do something in RA, one of those TV video spots on this whole
Absolutely.
idea of biophilia,
Good idea.
Yeah.
philiac, whatever that word was. It was kind of a
Absolutely.
cool word.
Yes.
I'd have to learn how to say it better. But maybe there's a TV spot to get the community engaged in what that means, and if we want to apply to be that one of those cities, that might be a great way.
Love to do that. Love to help you.
And maybe a presentation as well to the public?
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. And then you did go to that environmental showcase, right? That was
Yes.
hosted by the Sharon Bouleva.
Yes.
So awesome on that. Yay, getting us involved in the county, making our presence known, which of course they know who we are. But you guys are making a positive impact. We go in and do all the negative stuff, and you guys go in and make everybody smile, which is great. Somebody's got to do it. So thank you.
If I can mention one thing about that, what Sherry's talking about is the Environmental Vision workshop that the county put on at the Government Center last weekend, and where they unveiled the new revised environmental vision for the county. And they looked at 7 core environmental aspects and created a working framework for that. And what went through my mind was next year, when a revised racer is done, we can actually show what Reston is doing and how it meets the framework of the new vision for the county. And we do a great job of that from what I could pick
good.
up.
Yeah, we want to use all those really positive things when we go see the county. So we're going to steal some of that thunder, I think. We'll borrow it. We'll let you keep it. So I know I'm Julie, and then there was a comment from the community as well.
I would like to add on to Sherry's thing. You know, we're having these Sunday morning drop-ins to Lake House once a month. And I would love to see one of those drop-ins kind of focus on what we're doing in this area and, you know, kind of co-host the board with EAC on the report. And I think it could be another one of those educational things where you get a lot of people
I like
attending.
that idea a lot. Yeah.
So that's
Is that what you were trying to say? Yeah.
You just said it more articulately.
Okay. Thank you, Doug, and thank you so much for all of y'all's work. I know this wasn't, he's the pretty guy that gets to get up in front of everybody, but I know there's a lot of people
There's a
behind
lot
him
of
working
people
on
that-
it.
Can you raise your hand that worked on the report?
You guys did a fabulous job.
Let me also say that Sabrina did a great job of helping us get all this pulled together.
We love Sabrina.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Tammy.
Tammy has a comment, yep. Thank you.
If you're going to rain on our parade, you can't talk.
No, please, this is such a fabulous report. I read it in the boarded packet. Please also send a link or something to the Reston Planning and Zoning Committee. I'm going to those meetings. Doug said there are 1 million people coming in. I swear to God, they're all coming to Reston. Seriously, I am on them. They are into stormwater. They asked that question.
That's a great idea.
But lighting, they have no clue. The tree canopy is going away. Parks and recs and green space.
Yeah.
If these people who are volunteers and our first line of defense against bad design are aware of some of what Doug's committee has found out, and they become informed, this is so much better for us. We need a holistic help.
Yeah,
So
no,
please,
that's a great idea.
Please,
and
if-
even on in the bigger report, if we just pulled out those sections for them that are they might be most interested
yeah,
in.
just please make that available to them. They really need to know
Great
something.
idea.
Thank you.
Great idea, Tammy. When you have good ideas like that, you can come up anytime. Okay, are we on to the next item? Which is, listening sessions outbrief. Oh, man, we're so far behind.
Good
Hi,
evening.
Mike. Hi, Carol.
Joining me tonight is Carol Nahorniak, the Vice Chair of the Community Engagement Advisory Committee. We know Doug just did a great job doing the abbreviated executive summary. We're going to do the abbreviated report tonight. As you know, over the past 2 months in May and June, the board in partnership with the Community Engagement Advisory Committee conducted 4 listening sessions, 1 in each district, and then a community-wide 5th meeting. Tonight, what we want to do is present to you the feedback that came from those listening sessions, and I know that in your report packets, you have a detailed report which contains the methodology that was used, as well as the general themes that came out of each of the meetings. So what we're going to do tonight is just talk briefly about the main takeaways, kind of quickly summarize the main themes and issues that actually came out of that meeting. So I'm going to speak for a brief period on the main takeaways, then Carol's going to talk briefly about some of the next step recommendations for the board to consider. The primary theme that consistently came across in all 5 meetings was really directed to development and redevelopment within the community. And I know that virtually all of you participated in almost all of those sessions, and you heard that theme. But for our members that are listening tonight, development and redevelopment was a primary concern, and in particular as it relates to quality of life here in Reston. They were also concerned about cost of living, being driven by development and redevelopment, and ultimately the overall sense of community in Reston. There was also a strong consensus from members attending the meeting that along with development and redevelopment, it really is RA's responsibility to advocate on behalf of its members, predominantly to the county, as issues come up. There were also some secondary issues that pretty much came up in all 5 of the meetings, and those were really directed at 2 main RA-related issues, the first being communications and the second being budgeting. So as it relates to communications, general member feedback spoke to more effective, efficient, and substantive and far-reaching. I think those were general statements, and one of the things you're going to hear from Carol in terms of next steps is really what do we do to maybe mine a little bit deeper as to what members mean in those 3 areas. And then as it relates to RA budgeting, budget management, rising assessment fees, and general spending. So those were, when you look at kind of common themes that cut across all 5 of the meetings, those were predominantly the major feedback areas. There were additional themes, 3rd, 4th, 5th items, which are in the report package that you can look at, but those were the major issues. Carol's going to take a few minutes to talk about next steps considerations for the board.
That's right. Which are obviously listed right there, but as Mike said, we got input.
Carol, you might have to get closer to the mic.
Yeah.
As Mike said, we got input from about maybe 100 people. That hardly reflects the entire population. So our next steps are based on that to some degree. But even before we entered into this, we kind of thought this is the way we'd like to go. So this valuable feedback that we received, it's greatest for use as is, but it's also a great pool for developing questions for a survey and for post polls now and in the future. So that is included in one of the next steps. We would hope that the board would see fit to direct staff to publicize the findings from this initiative and notify participants in the meetings of the report's publication. We've heard in the past that people have participated in things and they don't know if RA ever took any action on them. This would be showing that we're listening and we're doing something with this information. The RA board should give consideration how it intends to incorporate the feedback captured in this process into its 2018-2019 budget development process and its goals and priorities for 2018. And the CAC, this is my pet that I really would like to see, the CEC recommends conducting a quantitative or qualitative survey to collect further input from members. And RA staff recommends the incorporation of the biannual member listening meetings into Reston Association's communications plan. They were a very positive experience. I think everyone really enjoyed them and had the opportunity to speak. And those of us listening, I certainly appreciate hearing from them. And I think you that attended also did. So it's been a good process.
So by biannual, this is one of those words that always gets me. Is that every other year or is that twice a year? Okay,
Twice a year.
all right.
Can go both ways.
It can go both ways, so I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Now you guys, thanks you guys for helping out on those listening sessions and taking in all that data. So.
Be happy to take any questions.
So do we have any sessions set up for the remainder of the year?
We haven't yet, but if that's the desire of the
I'm a
board,
glutton
we'd
for
be
punishment.
happy
I
to
volunteer to assist with
set
that.
up another round.
Yeah.
Make sure we capture that in the minutes.
Yeah.
Victoria will
Victoria's
do
a
all,
glutton for punishment.
will
Yeah.
facilitate all further sessions.
Not all.
Oh.
And one particular idea that we've kind of tossed around, one idea that we've tossed around internally is maybe the fall session becomes kind of a larger community meeting.
Yeah.
And then you go out in the springtime and you do each of the ones in the district. Because it is clearly taxing, even on the board, in terms of dates, to coordinate 5 meetings twice a year like that.
Yeah, there might be opportunities to some of the budget things that you want to get more public input on in this, and so that I think there's going to be some synergies in the fall that we might want to take advantage of.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, as part of the capital budget as well as the operating budget, I think we will be doing some public sessions.
Yeah.
I hope to do a substantive one so that people can actually give feedback on it.
And these were nicely kind of informal so that there wasn't a lot of preparation required. It was just like, tell us what you think.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of need for giving them a lot of information. In fact, I think that was the appreciated part of it.
And we could do them more focused to
Yeah,
say,
that's
you
the
know, we
next
have
step, specific,
Right.
for example, these are the projects we are proposing. How do you react to that? And actually having, as part of a technology plan, right?
Yeah.
Having a way to actually to get real data back from the people, not just, comments during meetings, but actually for them to provide feedback.
But they can check boxes.
Yeah, but they can check boxes, exactly.
And the other option is clearly we have opportunities ongoing. So if you just look at next Tuesday night, for example, with National Night Out, we've got an opportunity in the Southgate neighborhood to even kind of engage people one-on-one, or we've got the farmers market coming up in the fall, multicultural festival. Those are opportunities for the board, representatives of the CEAC, and really other volunteers to just get out there and do one-on-one engagement. So it can be quantitative data, but we can continue the qualitative work as well.
That's great. So we have a motion in our packet that we direct the staff to publicize the report that they just gave us. Let's see.
So moved.
Okay. As stated in the packet. That motion, Sabrina.
Victoria can second.
Control C, Control V.
Seconded by Victoria. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? David? Aye.
Thank
Still
you.
with us. That's great. Thank you, guys. Thank you for all the hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Carol.
Okay.
I need to get.
Garrett, you're on. So this is, we're going to talk about capital projects, the Hook Road project and the Central Service Facility renovation.
I'm going to do my best to get you back on schedule.
That would be so awesome. That means you're already done.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best.
Move to,
Move to the vote.
You can go ahead and take action now without being presented. So I've got the two projects to give you guys an update on and take action. First is the Hook Road project. Just to give you a quick recap, it's a planning project that is designed to engage the community to determine what enhancements are desired by residents and users of the facility. So we have it broken down into 4 phases. The community engagement and data collection phase, which is the bulk of the project. Conceptual design phase that will be done by our selected engineer. A final concept design, or as we're now sort of terming it, a master plan design that will allow us to sort of pick and choose what components of that we have the budget capability to move forward with. And then, of course, whatever the key decision point at the end is that determination of what items are we really going to take up as a end result of the project. Just to give you more detail, it's going to be a multi-step engagement process, starting with a notification letter that will be sent to residents as well as users, with area signage, making sure that we are really publicizing all of the meetings. The first information session is scheduled for August 29th at 6:30 p.m. here at RA headquarters, and that'll be the opportunity for us to sort of set the stage. CRAC will be heavily involved in setting the stage and explaining to all the residents their purpose for this project, as well as the intent for making it an example of what community engagement and full facility projects can be, followed by multiple what we would call a design charrettes that we'll try to hold locally as possible near the recreation facility, most likely Lake Ann Elementary School, to encourage the residents to be able to come more easily, in addition to all the user groups and additional stakeholders. So I think I presented this to you back in February. This is the sort of the snapshot of the communication plan with all of the stakeholders identified, one of which is the working group, and that leads me to why I'm bringing this project up is last month you asked us to come back with a detailed description of what the working group purpose would be. So I have that for you. It's in detail in your packets. The purpose of the working group is to provide the Reston Association Board of Directors by January of 2018 with recommendations for implementing solutions that impact both park users and adjacent property owners after a series of public input meetings and coordination with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee and our selected design firm. Specifically, the working group objectives are to provide recommendations that would enhance the use of Hook Road Recreation Area through facility renovations and improvements, including but not limited to restroom facility additions, evaluation of existing amenities to improve landscaping and hardscaping, increase accessibility and improve safety for users, and fit within the budget constraints set by the board.
I really like D.
That is Hook Road for you. Yes. We added D by request.
Thank you.
I really like D.
Are there any budget constraints that the board has set, or is that
That is
to come?
Isn't that,
Still open?
it may be open, but why would we spend more money on another group when we've got a group on the table?
So right now, I've asked Garrett to.
I get the.
No, I know, to look at it as far as the reserve study and what the reserve study calls for Hook Road at this point as our
So,
beginning.
I can answer that for you.
Yeah,
as
sure.
well. On the property, if you look at all the assets that are there, the reserve study accounts for $508,000 of replacement costs for everything from the tennis courts, the fences, the multipurpose court, renovating the fields, all the backstop for the baseball field, as well as the pavilion that is there. When we go through that list and actually come up with a more realistic estimate, that estimate is about $617,000, and most of that increase is due to the real cost of replacing lighting on the tennis courts. The reserve study really grossly underestimates the cost to replace lights for the tennis court. It only accounts for the poles themselves and the shoebox fixtures, but to really fix the issues that we've heard from tennis working group and our tennis staff, the issues that exist are more than just the visible lights that are there. So a full replacement of the wiring infrastructure would be needed in order to address that need appropriately.
So that's about an additional 100,000 or?
And it's happening earlier than anticipated because of that.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be 2027 was a replacement cycle, but it's now.
For the lights, yes.
For the lights,
They're
it's advanced.
scheduled for 2027, but they're failing far sooner than that.
When was the last renovation to the lighting?
1995.
It's never been replaced.
It's never been.
It's never been completely
So
renovated.
I would argue that this 2027 is a ridiculous.
You bring up a good point. You actually bring up a good point because part of the problem is I think we need to revisit, and it's not for today's agenda, revisit the reserve study itself.
Absolutely.
Because I think what Garrett is, with all his re-estimation of all the project costs, finding that they are much higher than what's there in the reserve study. So that's something that, Kate and Robert and I have talked about in terms of re-evaluating where that's coming from and going to the baseline data. That's where the problem comes from.
Absolutely.
And that's something that we're preparing for with the next reserve study. So the plan is in 2018, we're going to make sure we do a full inventory of all of the assets throughout the community so that when we are going into the scheduled reserve study in 2019, that we have a really more accurate and detailed approach at conducting that study and really assessing what we have, what the expected remaining life is on those items, and what the expected replacement cycle should be.
I guess the point that I'm making is that, and the lighting is just one very visible example. We've been kicking the maintenance down the road, and the reserve study might have said every 10 years it's got to be replaced. We haven't done it. We pushed it down the road. We pushed it down the road So when we look at particular items like the Hook Road lights, they say they really should be done 10 years later, and we're just advancing it. No, I'm saying that it should have been done 10 years ago.
The life that was, attributed to those lights was actually all the way up to 2027. The reserve study actually confirmed it. That's part of the problem. So which is why we need to go and reevaluate all of those things. And one of the things we're going to be faced with is, today we have a 67 million as the cost of replacing all the assets.
Is that a realistic number?
That is not a realistic number, it seems like. And again, from what I can, little bit of research that I've done, and correct me guys, Garrett and Robert, it seems like we've got, for many of those situations, the cost of the materials, but not really the labor, not really the design, right? And I can tell you, if you just look at the Pony barn, you will see that staring at you, because it cost us $50,000-$60,000 just to come up with the design. When you look at the reserve study, to replace all of them, the cost is $425.
Yeah.
You all know the bill for Pony barn that came back, $359. So there's lots of disconnect that we really need to address sooner rather than later. But
Appreciate what you're doing.
So for tonight's vote, is the motion that's on the screen is really just to approve the working group, is to put the working group together with this description.
I'll move to approve.
Second?
Any more discussion?
Yes.
I have further discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
I lived on Hook Road for 6 or 7 years. I think I know a little bit about the area, I know a little bit about the facility. And it's basically an exceptional park. This is not another field, it's not Brown's Chapel or anything like that. The kids will play soccer on the weekends, it's great. You know, the smaller kids, 8, 9-year-old, Little League soccer, they don't need great new backstops. They don't need perfectly manicured soccer fields, as long as it's safe and clean and everything's maintained really well. It's mostly parents and their kids sitting out with the blankets, having fun, a lot of very small kids, people with their dogs, throwing frisbees, flying kites, whether it's summer nights, weekdays. It's a park. You know, the talk of upgrading this to some tennis facility and all this other stuff is absolutely crazy with all the things we have to do in Reston. I drove by Hook Road twice on Tuesday night, 3 times yesterday. Not a very hot day, summertime, kids home from school. That's 5 trips. There were no tennis players. This is not a well-used tennis place. When I lived there, you go there, you can walk on the tennis court, nobody checks you past. The few tennis players you see there, they're not even Restonians. Here's an open court we can play on. Might be from Great Falls or somewhere else. This is a very lightly used facility. It's a park. That's what people use it for. You'll see people, some of the adults on a Sunday afternoon might come by and play flag football or play soccer. I'd love to see a facility just like this, just an open park in some other sections of Reston that really need it. This is not something we should be spending a lot of money on, doing a lot of studies. Let's enhance the lights, let's spend, and now we're saying, oh, well, it needs more than this, and we need to change the electricity and all that. And this has Pony Barn and Lake House all over it. The cost is going to be ridiculous for something that doesn't need to be done. I'll get really radical on this and say maybe we should do like Southgate did with their tennis court and change it to another use because nobody was using the tennis court. It would save us a heck of a lot of money and expand the park if we didn't have that tennis court at all.
So Ray, that's my.
So the whole idea that we're going to sit here and upgrade the lighting, which for the people around that, the affected parties there, are not going to be real happy to hear that anyway. They got lights shining all week long until, 11 to midnight or whatever, and nobody's even playing tennis. But, who cares? I don't get it. I just don't get it. There's better uses of the money. There's better uses of these studies. And if we're going to bring in somebody to study this, let's delay it. First, let's decide if we really even want to change anything here. This is something that works right now. The way it is right now, it works. So why do we want to, quote unquote, enhance it, modernize it, bring in more of a Disneyland look to it? No, this is not. It's in the community. It's a park in a community. Thank you.
Very quick comments. Anybody have any? The idea here is a working group to determine those very things that you just talked about may not be what they may not want a tennis court. We don't know. So, Victoria.
I just caution against starting a working group if we're not prepared to see this through in a reasonable time period. Because I will tell you that the Pony Barn Working Group at this point, there are members of it that are extraordinarily frustrated that it has taken 3 years. And that they did have approval, and that approval was pulled back. And they just went before the BOC, and they were told, come back again later. So what I don't want us to do is get engaged community members and then make them angry, and they don't want to deal with us because we're dragging our feet. So if we're ready to do this, great. But if we're not, let's hold off till we're ready.
Julie.
I have a question about the working group description, and I believe words matter. So the word I have a problem with is impact in this statement. For solutions that impact both park users and adjacent property owners. And impact to me seems to be the wrong word, because that generally means a negative.
How about effect?
I just don't like the word impact.
Okay, well,
I think it goes counter, but I think effect would be fine by me.
Well, we do have a motion on the table, and it's been seconded, so it'd
So
have to
can
be
I have
amended.
a friendly amendment to change the word from?
What?
Well, that's a thing, isn't it?
That's a new twist.
Or it'll be this.
Okay, so.
Can the seconder?
The second is here.
I would say
I-
it's a premature motion. The thing hasn't been totally discussed, and let's make sure everybody's finished saying what they have to say. And then if somebody wants to put a motion out,
I think that
put
was
a
it.
motion.
I think I was the last.
There
one.
is a motion on the
There is a
table.
motion
As
on
the
the table.
seconder, I accept the friendly amendment.
Any other discussion on creating work?
Very
Eric,
quickly.
please, we're 40 minutes behind.
Yes, a no-cost working group who wants to prioritize improvements is fine. But I'm with Victoria. Nothing happens here until the Pony Bar is resolved, period. Nothing. Nothing. That has been on our plate for 3 years. We cannot do anything on this till we do Pony Bar.
But you're not opposed to a working group being
Nope,
established?
I absolutely, let's get the inputs. Let's see what the universe of possibilities are. So, yes.
Okay.
And just for clarification, the directive that we'll be working with this group is their end product is just a master plan.
Yep.
And to then be determined by the board for future activities.
And they will make inquiries in the neighborhood about desired uses?
Yes.
Yeah, there'll be community meetings.
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, so can
May I
we,
suggest a change? May I suggest an amendment? Addition, actually. To Ray's
See what
point,
John
it's
says.
absolutely right. So can we add one more bullet point that says the working group will also determine if and what changes actually are needed. No, you can agree, you can leave it as it is,
I would have the board make those determinations.
right.
okay? All right.
Yeah,
I
fair enough.
don't think that's right.
No,
Yeah.
not determine. What I mean is, come up with suggestions.
Should really, yeah, they can, I think that's the intent. They're going to come up with suggestions, but it's the board's key decision point at time when they choose what you want to do.
Right.
So-
Feel free to decide that nothing needs to be
So I'd like to call for a vote on the motion
As amended?
as amended,
amended.
changing the word impact to effect.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Wait a minute, what is the motion exactly?
It's what's on the screen.
Approve the following description.
Board motion 1.
And the word impact is changed to effect.
With the word impact change.
A-F-F-E-C-T.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Get all those? All those opposed?
I'm opposed to that.
2 opposed. So the motion passes?
No, I didn't. I said yes.
Sridhar said yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
David voted aye.
Yes.
So it's,
Ray and I are the negative noes.
so it's 6 to 2.
Yeah, I know where it's headed, I agree with you.
Thank
Because
you.
Mike walked
Yeah.
out.
All right.
Okay, moving on to the capital projects of the Central Civil.
So CSF, we presented CSF back in February, and you all approved the release of some hold funds for our design team to complete the design phase and to receive bids from general contractors. So now I'm back reporting the results of that effort. So there we go. So again, this is CSF. Scope of the project there are to renovate the main building and warehouse, specifically the office space area where most of our staff use. We have some bathroom inefficiencies at both buildings that we're looking to address as a result of this being a permanent project. There is accessibility that we have to be responsible for making sure that we add to the building. Energy efficiency is a major concern there, so replacing windows, energy efficient HVAC units, updating security, improving the network there, as well as providing adequate workspaces for training and other activities for staff is important. Here is just a snapshot of the main building. Here's a concept of what the building would look like post-project. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but most of the work is on the, this is the main building. On the left side of the screen, top is the existing. Bottom will be the new space with more workspaces for staff, as well as a improved multi-purpose area for staff to use for lunch, breakfast, as well as safety trainings that are fairly frequent that now are being held outside or in the actual shop areas. Other major changes, of course, as I mentioned, expansion of the restroom facilities, shower, and locker room, so that our staff have space to change, shower as they need to after working outside, especially on hot days. Here is the warehouse area. Most of the warehouse is being untouched, except for the very bottom office space area where we have some environmental staff and our arborists. So they will have some office improvements. The biggest change is they have an addition of a bathroom that they do not have right now. Very important to make sure that we have restroom facilities that are easily accessible for staff. So that's the bulk of the work that's scheduled there. Where we are now, we're at sort of the final KDP to initiate implementation and construction. We've received those construction estimates. The original budget was approved at $1.64 million. Our inception to date costs as of the end of June were at $150,000. That's for all the design work that's gone into the project thus far. So the update on the budget is what you see. You have a more detailed listing within your packets. I just kind of focused the summary for you here on the screen. In February, we presented a total budget of $1.7 million. That was the estimate based on the conceptual design of the project, which is why we asked for some time and funds to allow the architects and engineers to complete that design so that we could get real cost estimates. We received estimates from 4 bidders, 4 general contractors, and on the far right, we now have the updated costs, which are much more detailed and in a positive direction. We were able to reduce the total cost of the project down closer to the budget, to the $1.647 million. It's about $7,000 over, but that takes into account that we have a combined $128,000 project contingency to account for any unknowns. But at this point, our unknowns have reduced because we were able to fully design out the project. We've had contractors visit the site and look at both buildings in detail to really know what's there and what expected costs should be. So we're confident at this point that with the nature of the work, we're not necessarily demolishing a significant amount. We're really just gutting office space. That there aren't a lot of unknowns, and hopefully that contingency will be able to return back to the fund. So our recommendation is, now that we know that we're able to conduct the projects within budget or hopefully below budget, to proceed with securing a general contractor, obtaining permits with the county, and proceeding with pre-construction and construction activities. So you have the motion there to release the remaining funds that are in the 2017 budget for CSF renovation. Any questions, concerns?
Garrett, in the spreadsheet that's included in the board package.
Yes.
So the leftmost column with the green heading is the update as of today.
Yes.
And then we have we have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers, number columns with the blue heading, and they are moving from left to right, kind of office. It's basically, I guess, what the base scope had been previously to this one.
In February.
And then there's the lead for the main building only costs. Then to the next one to the right is the solar project, and the final one is alternatives, that is add deducts.
Right.
So I'm unclear about the status of the lead stuff, the solar stuff, and what puzzles me most on the add deducts is they occur down at the bottom, and some of them seem rather important, but and by my addition, there are about 450,000 adds and 13,000 deducts, with a notation that RA can self-perform. So my question is, that 435,000, 37,000, is that going to be done, and when?
All the last 3 columns are all considered optional items. So
none of them are necessary for the functioning of the building.
Correct.
And so we are not proceeding with LEED certification.
Not at this time.
And we are not proceeding with the solar.
Correct.
So John, they'll be part of the capital budget session as part of their considerations.
Right. Yeah.
Solar in particular.
Yes.
Solar in particular.
These can be retrofitted.
They can be added.
Solar for
if
sure.
you choose to fund those items.
So, but none of the 3 of those columns are essential to the full functioning of the building.
Correct.
So I have a question. So you said you got estimates from how many different vendors? For
4 general contractors.
Basically got written estimates from them and.
Correct.
Okay, all right, good. And I'd like to see this flow through the contracting process and as part of the cycle, so we'll go through that, through the approval cycles and review and all that.
So can we have a motion to move? Are we ready? To move to release the remaining 1.3 and change of the, what's on the screen?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain?
I'm abstaining.
Passes.
Thank you.
Happy constructing. Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you, Garrett.
All right, on to
the RTC parking matter. So I know that I think we have two members that want to make comments on this. So do you want to come on up? Suzanne?
Good evening, I'm Suzanne Zern at 1700 Red Oak Circle. And I'm also the founder of the Keep Parking Free at RTC campaign. And I wanted to thank you for putting the RTC parking issue and the proposed resolution on your agenda tonight. Since we talked in May, Boston Properties has implemented a few changes. From the community's perspective, and by many measures, the situation is actually worse now. There are even more layers of rules now. The changes are not bringing people back because parking at RTC has the reputation of being a complicated and unfriendly experience. For example, you must know in advance the correct garage to park in to receive validation from some merchants. You must do your research to know whether a parking session is required or not on the day and time you visit. You must do more research to know the difference between street and garage parking days and rates. You must know in advance the special rules for parking when dining at Jackson's. You must know and follow specific procedures to get 1 hour free parking during the day. These are just a few illustrations. I don't know of any paid parking systems in our region that are this complicated. Do you? When I use Park Mobile in DC, even that system lets me know if a session is required or not based on the time of day. Not true of the so-called state-of-the-art system that we have with this Park RTC app. Unfortunately, the Park RTC system continues to negatively affect the reputation of Reston and adversely affect the residents and businesses. But don't just take my word for it. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce into the record nearly 10,000 names and comments from the community. Your neighbors, your constituents, responded in large numbers to the petition opposing paid parking at RTC, the one that was on change.org. I encourage you to read their comments and consider how RA could add weight to their voices in this important community issue. In closing, I strongly urge your support of a resolution authorizing the RA leadership to engage with Boston Properties on the RTC parking issue. Thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Thanks, Suzanne.
Any questions? Okay, Paul?
Yes, hi, I'm Paul Steidler. I live at 11982 Sentinel Point Court here in Reston. I'd like to thank the board for putting this matter on tonight's agenda. As Suzanne mentioned, and I think it's pretty obvious, there's virtually nobody in Reston who likes the paid parking situation at the town center. If you were to do a survey of your constituents, probably 95+% would be opposed to it. But beyond the public outrage, there are some very, I think, fundamental reasons why the board why it is in the best interest of the community for the board to engage in this issue. And I would encourage you to not only have that dialogue with Boston Properties and the town center, but to go further and to be very outspoken about this parking system that's in place. The current system is taking at least $16 million a year out of Reston. And there are many people who find it difficult to afford these rates that go up to $24 a day. The working poor, senior citizens, students, and others who are just starting to work. The measure is also creating a situation where Reston is becoming less of an open and inclusive community. It is more difficult for people to go to different sections of Reston. I spoke before I left for this meeting about 3.5 hours ago with somebody in my office complex who mentioned the fact that he doesn't do any business lunches in the town center anymore. He used to do 2 or 3 a month. He's just given up on it. He's been frustrated. He's been late for movies when he's been going over there. And he is not patronizing the town center. This is not an issue about a 2-foot boat size. This is an issue about the character and the direction of our community.
Are we going to become just an area that's going to become an elitist, gated community with all the decadence that brings? Or are we going to go back to our core values of being inclusive of all, of having a place where we can all come and go more freely and enjoy what Reston has to offer, and which has made Reston a national model? That is what is at stake here. That is why it rises to the attention of the board. And I would strongly encourage you to adopt tonight's resolution and to take all matters necessary to help in this process. We realize you can't wave a magic wand and make Boston Properties change this. This is part of a community process. There are 10,000 members of the community who have spoken out. There are merchants who are hurting. There are workers who are hurting in the community. All that we are asking you to do is to speak out clearly and forcefully for this onerous parking fee to be rescinded. Thank you for your consideration. Thank you for your action tonight.
Thank you.
So in discussions with Kate about how to move forward with this situation, because we know it's a huge concern in the community, and we've heard in 10,000 signatures pretty much tell you how big it is. We thought about drafting a letter and sending it to Boston Properties, but then we rethought that and thought, you know what, we probably just need to go have a conversation with them first. And so we're asking tonight that the board authorize myself and David and Kate to go meet with Boston Properties and talk with them about the situation in our Reston roles, and that's what we're asking as our first step. So that's simply what we want to do first. So without objection, that's where we'd like to do.
What's your position going in to these discussions?
It's a conversation around everything that Suzanne and Paul have kind of said, and hearing what their plans are, how they see things, just trying to understand, and then we'll go from there. But I think the first step is a conversation with them as representing at least the Reston Association. Reston's a lot bigger than just Reston Association, but we feel like we owe that to the folks that live in the Reston Association to go speak on your behalf to them. Victoria?
Are we having any issues with people not wanting to park over at the town center, so parking in some of the neighborhood streets and maybe litter, and so maybe...
Litter's an issue for
Yeah.
sure. Yes.
Can I speak to that a little bit? So there's been many documented videos and photos taken of, in particular, the construction workers that ironically are employed by Boston Properties to build the new apartment high-rise at the town center. And they're not parking in the spots that have been designated from them in an open parking lot on the back of the town center. I don't know what zone that's called.
It's all the way at the diagonally opposite side.
Right. So where they're parking is in front of the library and in front of that retirement home, down Temporary Road and North Shore, clogging up all of that and creating unsafe situation. And they're not even disguising that. They're walking in their vests. They're walking in their construction clothes. There's lots of videos that Reston Patch has reported on this issue several times, but they continue to park and clog up those side streets. So they're not even providing parking for their own construction workers. And so they continue to have a problem just with that audience, not to mention others who were also trying to avoid parking at the town center. Interestingly enough, the construction workers are displacing those free zones right off the property that people like me would normally want to go park at when I want to go to the town center. And it's created even more confusion with the Jackson's lawsuit. Who knows what to do in the Orange Garage? It's a free-for-all, just park there. That type of situation has just created more confusion in the community.
Okay, for sake of time.
I was just thinking that's a good approach.
Thanks.
Okay, so.
Yes,
I'm good.
David, I think that point is very well taken, and we could pull that into the discussion if we're able to have
Yes.
that discussion.
Absolutely.
I think the important thing for the community is to know that RA is engaged with this issue. This is the first step. We think it's an important step. It doesn't make a lot of sense just to pass a resolution and to send it over to Boston Properties. I think it's very important that we engage with them, and that's why I'd like to propose, or I'd like to move the proposed board motion.
Second.
Second, Pat.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And If I may just say, this is not a brush off.
No.
What you're doing.
No, not at all.
This is trying to. This is trying to find the best way to a common goal.
Okay.
If I make a suggestion, you have a realtor who actually knows something about the subject and could negotiate effectively, where you guys don't know what you're talking about. Why don't you take advantage of his skills?
I'm sorry, who's
Sorry about that if you disagree. I hope you appreciate the compliment.
I'm sure he does. Okay, moving on to Kate, the park.
In the interest of time, I'm going to keep this very brief. Before you is a matter that we'd actually like for you to take up in the month of September. It has to do with Hunters Woods Park, which is owned by Reston Association. It was upgraded in 1993 by the Park Authority under an agreement that the Park Authority would have the right to schedule the field. That is coming up on October 2018, but if the board were to choose to do something different with that agreement, we would need to alert the Park Authority by October 2017. So I just wanted to put it out there, wanted to make sure we got it on your agenda for September.
Okay. That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if I have questions, I can send them to you in between.
Please do.
Okay, thank you.
You're up again, Kate. So if you could do that one as fast as you did the last one.
So without objection, we're just going to put it on September.
Yes.
With a motion.
Yes.
Gotcha. Good. Piggybacking off of some of the comments from Reston Association member Moira Callahan, it's important to encourage Fairfax County Park Authority to pursue the dog park study. They've put it off several times. They really do need to fund that. There are some issues around dog park, not only the ones that were mentioned by Ms. Callahan, but also there is a need for such facilities and rules around them. And it's becoming ever more a problem for the community, and it's important that they pursue it. So I think it's important that we encourage them to do that. So the motion is to send a letter encouraging them to take that up and put it in.
Second.
All in favor?
So
Who made the motion?
I did.
Eric?
He did. I seconded. Yep.
Slip that in there.
Seconded. Any opposed? Was that unanimous? Okay. All right. Thanks, Kate, for getting us almost on schedule. So are you up again? No.
No.
Wake Robin Stream.
Those people.
I feel like this has been on every agenda for the last.
One day.
You just like talking about this, don't you?
Love it.
Okay.
Madam President.
We're just
Sir.
going to get it
Before
done.
Larry begins, I would like to point out that I live on Wake Robin Lane. I am not an affected party, but my neighbors are.
Seriously
Thank you.
conflicted, is it?
Seriously. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for disclosing.
Get out of here.
That does need to be noted, by the way, Sabrina.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, Larry, you're up.
If only we're that easy, but yes, it needs to be noted.
Well, now we're not so far behind.
I'll try
Catch it
to
up.
maintain that positive momentum that we've got going. So what you have before you is a request to grant an easement to Fairfax County for the stream restoration that has been discussed for quite a long time with the very engaged community of Cedar Cove Cluster and the residents on Wake Robin Lane. And what you have up on the image here is just sort of highlighting, we've got two images. This is the actual easement plat that was presented to us in the offer letter, which you have in your package from Fairfax County. And this is to allow them to do the work as well as perpetually maintain the work that will be done. And I also want to note that Megan Noe Fellows, the project manager from Fairfax County, is in the audience. She's glutton for punishment, I guess. And so if there aren't any questions for her, as opposed to what we may be discussing in the executive session, we can ask her to address those. But in summary, this is a project that the Reston Association feels very strongly about. There was great community engagement. They brought this to our attention. We are very pleased that Fairfax County has actually taken this up, gone into the design process, and at this point is working with not only us as a private landowner, but the adjacent landowners for the ingress and egress. Those are private negotiations that we are not party to. And so this is our part of this project. And, you know, I can tell you the staff would strongly encourage you to move forward with this. We are recommending that we go into executive session to discuss some of the very specific details of this. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I know, as Eric said, you've seen this a lot. So hopefully we've answered most of those questions up to this point.
Just a little.
Julie?
I just want to make a point that it's important that we make a decision, take a position on this now because of the funding cycle that Fairfax County is in, so that we do not lose our place.
That is correct. Time is important. Excellent point. Are there any other
questions?
questions?
Thank you.
So there's a motion.
Madam Chairman, I make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss the proposal before us for legal counsel on the agreement that we would have to sign.
Second.
Second.
All right.
Madam Chairman, I was unclear in the earlier discussion about the vote, whether we were going to also tonight have executive session direction on that too. If so, I include as part of my motion that we receive legal counsel on the issues regarding the vote.
I would second that.
Second, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
David Silver?
No. Oh,
Well, you have to come out of executive session.
We're live.
you've come out of executive session, is that
Yes.
correct?
That is correct.
Cleansing motion? Do you know it? Who's got it?
No, we have a
It is
motion.
on item O.
Shut down. If somebody have it, they can read it.
I can read it.
Matt, go ahead.
Move to grant Fairfax County a floodplain and
No,
storm.
cleansing motion.
Cleansing motion.
Oh, Lord.
Madam Chairman, I move that the Reston Association Board of Directors certifies to the best of each member's knowledge that only those matters appropriate for executive session of a contractual and legal nature were heard, discussed, or considered by the board during executive session.
Second that.
All that attest to that?
Aye.
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 Anybody say no? No. All right. Eric, you're up.
We have more?
I move to grant Fairfax County a floodplain and storm drainage easement over Reston Association common area located between Wake Robin Lane and Cedar Clove Custer, just south of South Lakes Drive and downstream of South Lakes High School, Langston Hughes Middle School, and Whisperwood Cluster under the conditions including compensation approved by the RA Board and negotiated with legal counsel as enumerated in the attached documents.
I would like to second that as a South Lakes district.
Any discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Unanimous. We have one more.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Damn!
Nicely done.